Not too long ago, I saw a viral video compilation of thieves in low-income areas. People filling up baskets with items and walking out of the store, breaking windows, threatening cashiers, that kind of stuff. But one of the 3-second clips in the compilation was something different. In the clip, we can see a group of people walking over a broken glass door, slowly marching. It looks like a riot, but there's more to it. I was there, and I want to tell the whole story. This happened a few years ago. Before heading off to college, I wanted to save up some extra money. I used to live in a pretty shitty neighborhood, and there were only 2 options for a side gig. One was at the local bar, and the other was at a convenience store. I applied at the convenience store, had a quick interview with the manager, and started the following Monday. Now, I gotta stress just how run down this place was. This was the kind of place where the same homeless man sits outside every day, all day, where there were no baskets to carry stuff in. They'd all been stolen too many times. There were a dozen signs taped to the door with a dozen little rules, all to prevent the various grifts and thefts that had happened over the years. No bags, no backpacks, no plastic bags, no canvas bags, no carts, and of course, no weapons. Still, despite its faults, it was the only local place in the community people could afford to shop at. And while there were some who took advantage of it, a vast majority loved the place, right down to the homeless guy chilling by the door. I was planning to be there for the summer. We had a morning and evening shift, and we changed who did that every 2 weeks. The video clip in question took place during my 4th week, my 2nd week at the evening shift. It was a Saturday evening. Benny, the homeless guy, was off to recycle some cans. The AC was acting up, leaving a thin layer of humidity on everything in the store, including me. I was working the counter. It was almost closing time, but I waited for Benny to get back before closing. The guy was harmless and survived on little to nothing. He usually spent what he had earned during the day before closing time. I wasn't working alone though. There was also Lonnie, a mother of 3 who wanted to get some extra money on the side while her husband was posted overseas. A woman in her mid-40s with this long black hair that could almost reach her knees. Every time I think of her, I'm reminded of oatmeal cookies. We were ready to close when a customer walked in. I was expecting Benny, so when I turned around to see a complete stranger, I was a bit surprised. Now, we get new people all the time, but this one was unusual for a number of reasons. 1, he was clearly not a local. This guy was wearing a brand-named blazer and custom-tailored pants. 2, he was in a hurry. He was clutching this brown canvas bag, panting like a tired dog. I didn't get the time to ask him to hand it over, as per the sign. You got salt?" he asked. "Mineral salt." "Yeah, go check." He was sprinting down the aisle before I had a chance to finish my sentence. Lonnie peeked out from the dairy aisle with a raised eyebrow. I shrugged. Moments later, there was some commotion. I went to check on the guy and saw that he'd pulled down 6 cans of salt on the floor, opened them, and drowned his bag in it. He was whining and pleading, repeating, "Come on, come on, come on," over and over. He was in distress, like his life depended on this. I didn't know what to do. I was going to call the cops, but I wanted to de-escalate first. Still, I didn't want to talk to him. There was no telling what a guy in his state of mind might do. Instead, I stepped back, got my phone out, and talked to him as calmly as possible. Sir? You can't do that in here," I said. "You need to pay and take this outside." There's no time," he said. I can't, I'm sorry." What happened next came out of nowhere. One moment, I was looking at this crazy guy covering the ground in salt. The next moment, pandemonium. Lonnie screamed at me from the front counter. The lights began to flicker, then die, leaving the store in sudden darkness. Running up to the front counter, my jaw dropped. Lonnie had barely managed to close and lock the front door. There were at least 24 people outside, none of whom I recognized. These people were something else entirely. At first glance, there was nothing strange about them, but looking a little closer, you could see a few things were off. For example, there was a woman in a nightgown. She didn't even have any shoes on. A little further back, there was a guy who looked like a political campaigner for a candidate I'd never heard of. And to the side, there was this really tall man who looked like a fancy sommelier, except the front of his shirt had been cut to shreds, like he'd been run over by a lawnmower. These people were gathering around the storefront, poking and prodding for a way in. One of them smacked their hand flat on the glass. Lonnie was already calling the cops. The store had security cameras once, but they had long since been wrecked. We just had these camera-looking things that were basically just a red light. It was mostly a deterrent rather than something functional, so there was no way for me to check how many people were really out there. Still, there were more than a few. I didn't even know that one of the front cameras actually worked, providing the clip in question later on. The strange man with the canvas bag was on his knees, crying, like full-on wailing like a scared kid. It was eerie to see someone just break down like this. It's at that point that you start to realize how serious something really is. We had managed to lock ourselves in. Lonnie was on the phone, trying to get the police to hurry. It wasn't easy to get them to come by this neighborhood. Apparently, it was viewed as a bit of a lost cause. They advised her to get out of there and let the insurance company deal with it. The fact that these people showed up out of nowhere didn't seem to bother them, and the fact that our lives were in danger was described as exaggerating. I have this one vivid memory of the beginning of that night. There was this neon sign for a bar across the road, and that was the only light that came through. All these strange people, backlit by this eerie red and blue. It was eerie. There was no way to tell what was going to happen next. Were they here for us? For the store? For the strange man? While Lonnie kept calling for help, I turned my attention to the stranger. He'd slumped down against one of the shelves and gone catatonic. He just sat there, staring at the bag. I pushed against his shoulder a bit, and he didn't seem to notice. I decided to check the bag. This, too, garnered no response. The bag contained a sort of metal thermos, a silvery gray container that had burst open. There was a navy blue liquid covering the inside of the bag, now drenched in salt. It had this faint smell of ammonia and had begun to harden into a gel. I did my best not to touch it. "It's too late," the man whispered. "It's too late. It doesn't matter anymore." "What?" I yelled. "What doesn't matter? Who are you?" He waved his head back and forth, as if bobbing for an answer, but no words came to mind. He shook his head and sunk his face back into his hands. I tried to push him to answer, but he was just broken. There was no point in talking to him, and judging by the sounds coming from our storage, I didn't have time to stand around. I could hear Lonnie yelling at an emergency responder. I could hear a repeated metal clanking out back, like someone was beating the back door with a steel pipe. Then, a grinding metal noise. It took a moment to realize that they were moving the trash container out back, probably to get up on the roof. I rushed back to Lonnie, who was hanging up the phone and trying again, desperate to get someone on the line who was actually ready to listen. "I think they're on the roof," I stuttered. "I think they're climbing." "Shit," she sniffled. "Shit, shit, shit." She took me by the arm and led me to the back storage. There, she pointed to a frail metal ladder leading up to a yellow hatch in the ceiling, about 12 feet up. "Make sure it's locked. Block it with something." "With what?" "I don't know." She stormed back out a second later. I grabbed a metal pipe from a vacuum cleaner and painstakingly made my way up the ladder. I was able to lock the hatch and jam the pipe between the two handles. It wasn't very stable, but it would hold up for a bit. It was probably some kind of rooftop maintenance hatch, most likely for ventilation purposes. The thing hadn't been opened in years. The rust on the metal rungs testified to that. As I was about to climb back down, I stopped. I looked back up. While the hatch was shut, I could tell there was something up there. There was this low huffing noise coming from it. Someone was pressing their face against the other side of the hatch, breathing against it. Out of some morbid curiosity, I crept a little closer. "What do you want?" I spat. "What the hell do you want?" "Home," something mumbled. "Go home." It was such an eerie noise, like someone belching the words rather than speaking them, like an involuntary painful reaction, more seizure than speech. Home. Go home. Then, a crash. I hurried down the ladder, rushing towards the front door. This was the scene shown in the clip. A few seconds that we got from the only security camera that intermittently worked. They had broken through the door and were slowly stepping in. They didn't seem to be in a hurry. If anything, they seemed exhausted. For a second, Lonnie and I just held our breaths. There was no way to tell what was going to happen. Finally, a man with a crowbar stepped forward. He looked at us and belched up something dark that covered his chest. Then, as if nothing happened, he walked right past us. The others followed. They were heading for the aisle with the strange man in the canvas bag. Lonnie had given up on calling for help and had resorted to filming instead. It was helpless, but the only thing we could do. We couldn't fight these people. We were outnumbered 10 to 1. I considered pushing past them and just running into the night, but I didn't want to go near them. There was no telling what would happen if you provoked them. These weren't ordinary people. I can't tell you what was wrong, but I can tell you something was. What happened next, you can't see in the clip. 24 people descended on that aisle, picking up that canvas bag and tearing it apart. They were rubbing the contents of the broken thermos thing over themselves, climbing over one another to get every little drop of it. It looked like a goddamn snake pit of arms, heads, and legs. People just evolving into careless meat, completely devoid of conscious thought. Animals. Meanwhile, the strange man was just sitting there, catatonic. As the bag was torn to pieces, a handful of the intruders sort of flopped over. They lay flat on their backs, letting their legs and feet curl into something resembling dead branches. Others were making these excruciating hungry whining noises, desperately weeping at the empty bag. Then they turned their attention to the stranger. One of them clawed at his leg. He shook them off. Then another did the same. "No, no," he said. "No, no." It was this weak little grunt, like the man was fighting himself to realize what was about to happen. Lonnie and I shared a terrified look. "The fire extinguisher," Lonnie whispered. "Get the fire extinguisher." It was across the store. As soon as I turned my back on them, I heard the strange man's groaning no grow more desperate. It went from a mumble to an angry yell to a desperate plea. Then, it was just screaming, blood-curdling screaming, gaining and losing in strength. I got the fire extinguisher and ran back toward the aisle, meeting Lonnie halfway. She had this haunted look on her face and shook her head. She couldn't close her mouth, like her face was stuck in a panicked, silent scream. She covered her mouth with her hands, shaking like dry leaves. "Oh my God," she huffed. "Oh my fucking God." I didn't see much. There was blood, but like thick blood, chunks of it, tufts of hair, pieces of torn shirt, bone. A couple of intruders were rolling around the bloodied floor like it was catnip. Others were slowly getting up, delusioned and desperate. One older man, covered mouth to toe in dripping blood, pointed a shaking finger at me and Lonnie. "Them," he coughed. Maybe them." Then they came for us. I didn't realize what was about to happen until they smiled. They clung to this primal hope that we, somehow, had something they needed. Lonnie snapped me out of it, dragging me into the back storage. She fumbled the keys and locked the double doors while I used a broom handle to bar them. There were still banging metal noises coming from both the ceiling hatch and the back door. Then, a voice. "Them," it wheezed. "Them. And from the back door, another voice parroted it. Like a rising storm, the words swept over the invaders until we heard it everywhere. Them. We made our way to the lunchroom before I heard the broom handle crack. They were through the storage doors. Lonnie was desperately dialing her phone while I locked us in the lunchroom, a tiny room with a shared bathroom, a window, and a couple of lockers. I could hear wet skin slap against the window, but I couldn't see what it was. The curtains were drawn. "Fucking yes!" Lonnie cried into her phone. Yes, it's me again. They're getting in." The window broke. Before I even saw someone, I pulled the safety pin from the extinguisher and blasted whatever was trying to get in. Lonnie fled into the bathroom, locking it behind her. The next few seconds felt like an eternity. Someone was crawling through the broken glass of the window. I could see the rough stains of blood against the powdered white. The lunchroom door buckled. I could hear flesh hit concrete as the hatch in the storage broke outside. Someone fell through. It sounded like a hard boot coming down on a wet cabbage. They were breaking through. Slowly, but surely. All to the sound of rhythmic, them. I swung a locker open, but I realized there was no way I could hide inside there. I couldn't go for the window. I couldn't push past the doors. This was it. To this day, I lay awake thinking about what I felt in that moment. The ice-cold primal panic, forgetting to breathe, feeling your tongue drying up as your airways open up, preparing for a death scream. Then, Lonnie pulled me into the bathroom. It was tiny. It was meant for, at best, one average-sized person. I fell backwards, landing with my back against the toilet. Lonnie climbed over me to lock the door, just as someone reached for the handle. The door opened inwards, so I put up my legs and locked my knees. Lonnie fumbled around in the sink, where she'd put her phone. Someone was still on the line, but I suspect all they could hear was our desperate screams, and that ever-present mantra of them. The hinges were shaking. The metal handle rattled. I could count every nail on the door and see the minuscule movements as they slowly rolled out. In that moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat and how it slowly synced up with the monotonous chant of them. Looking back at it, my mind is just black. There's nothing there. It's like trying to remember a vague nightmare, something that happened to an unreal version of yourself. And in those moments, when you realize that you were there, the real you, then it spirals. And for a couple of skipped heartbeats, I'm back there, fighting for my life. I'm back with that chant, that banging on the door. At one point, the door buckled. Fingers poked through the gap, grabbing Lonnie's long black hair. They tore out a handful of it, like a full fist. Even in all that panic, I saw her scalp turning red, but we pushed back, and the door stayed shut just a little longer. It was still dark, but with every push against the door, and with every inch the door gave, Little glimpses of moonlight came through, like a sickening strobe light, but a little longer was all we needed. The final thing I heard them say was, "No, home, please, home." Then this combination of home, them, please, and no. The banging slowly stopped. My hearing went from that awful mantra to my own heartbeat. And then, nothing. A light breeze, perhaps. A careful knock. Lonnie and I held our breaths. "Excuse me? Y'all doing all right in there?" Benny, the homeless guy. The coast was clear. Stepping out, there was no one but Benny left. The ground was covered in this black ash, stinking of ammonia and sulfur, but the attackers were gone. The place was a complete mess. Every window and door broken. You could see places in the ash where people had dragged their feet before they, seemingly, disappeared. Going back out into the store, there was no sign of the strange man. There was still blood splatter covering the side of the aisle, but now, the ground was covered in that awful black ash. I stepped over the broken front door, past the trampled flowers and broken glass. I have this vivid memory of blue petals from a sunflower getting stuck to the side of my black work shoes as I went out into the night. Minutes later, the police showed up, and the rest is history. The whole event was categorized as a sort of riot. No suspect was arrested, and the strange man was never identified. From what I've heard, they never investigated anything as a murder or assault. For all intents and purposes, that night was just a strange break-in. So yeah, somehow, that clip made its way into a random compilation online. I'm not sure how. Lonnie sent me the link. It's been a few years, but we still keep in touch. Not a lot though. Seeing one another kinda reminds us about that night, and I think both of us just want to forget. I guess what I want to say is that some things are different from what they seem, so think twice before you share something. Take a step back, think, and really look. The building had a reputation for being haunted. Kids would dare each other to go inside, but unlike other places around town, they would actually see something, or at least claim that they did. Little Jamie Curry, 9 years old, went into the basement of the abandoned Leatherman's complex on a dare and saw a zombie. He said he knew it wasn't just some guy in an outfit, because the zombie had a grapefruit-sized hole in its chest, and he could actually see right through the middle of the thing. He had run right past his group of friends who were patiently waiting outside, screaming and wetting himself as he went. Another young kid from my town, Alicia De Silva, 11 years old, said it was all a bunch of garbage, that she wasn't afraid of a rundown old factory building, except for maybe the asbestos, which her uncle told her rots your lungs from the inside. She had said she would even go inside it at night. Why not? After all, there was no such things as ghosts or boogeymen. One of her friends told Alicia that if she went inside the Leatherman's main building at night, grabbed something from the basement, and brought it back out for their mutual inspection, the friend would pay Alicia $5. Alicia had gasped. $5 was a good amount of money to someone like her. With $5, She could even get a kit so that she could finally fix her bike tire. They all met in front of the building, and Alicia disappeared into the dark fire doors on the side of the building, full of bravado and still laughing as she went inside. Except unlike Jamie Curry, Alicia never came back out screaming and wetting herself, never had the chance to tell some unbelievable story about what she encountered in the fetid basement of that place. Her body was never found. The police were called after a few hours, and they searched the entire building from top to bottom. They were able to follow some fresh footprints in the dust that might have been Alicia's, but when they got to the basement, the prints just disappeared, as if the person making them had simply gotten sucked up into the ceiling. And yet, they did find one thing, the only real evidence left in the entire building that night. What they found still gives me nightmares. One of her eyeballs was inside a snow globe. The glass and foundation of the snow globe were all intact, and there were no signs of foul play anywhere on the decoration. It was as if it had been manufactured that way, with that blue staring eye floating lazily next to the plastic mountains and white glitter snowflakes. In my nightmares, I often see an old woman shaking that snow globe, an old hag who cackles and whose split lips form into a dreadful smile as she stares directly at me. The eye and glitter all hang suspended in the water for a moment, then begin to fall slowly, the eye spinning rapidly as it drifts down in front of the globe. And when it stopped, I see it is looking directly at me, and it still looks frightened. Okay, so that last paragraph was pretty dark, but what I'm trying to communicate is just how terrifying that place is. The kids in the school know what's going on though, at least in a general way. After all, Alicia and Jamie came from among them, and they're not the only ones. Others have gone into that building before, and Matt wants me to go with him tomorrow to look at it. Maybe that's why the dreams are getting worse. Maybe that's why I've woken up screaming twice in the last few hours. Because there was something else too. Something else I saw in my nightmares. In that building, around the back walls, there were dozens of kids. Their skin was chalk white, their hair and eyes all pure black. They were dead, and thousands of missing posters started to fly down, all of them of smiling children. I looked between the ones surrounding me and the posters, and noticed that some of them showed these same kids. I turned to run, but little rotted hands started pulling me down, and then I was sitting straight up in bed, yelling and pleading. I really don't want to go in that building tomorrow. So Matt and I went inside the doorway. No way I was going in the basement, but just the front doorway. Well, that wasn't so bad. I even stuck my head in and looked around inside. Matt didn't see it, but I did. There was something huge in the front hall. It wasn't much more than a silhouette. It looked like a very tall, very thin man in a suit, whose neck was all twisted and strange. It came off his chest like a snake's, turning and curling back on itself. And at the end, it had this reptilian face. Everything about the man was hairless and slimy. I could smell the strange stuff on his skin. But by the time I had gotten Matt's attention and pointed it out to him, the guy was gone. I don't know how he disappeared so fast. Matt was making fun of me as we walked home afterwards, pointing at random alleyways and asking, "Do you see him there too?" And then laughing. It wasn't that funny. I'll prove to him there was someone in there. I convinced Matt to come back with me. I need to see what's in there. He wasn't thrilled about it, but I told him an older kid offered to pay $10 for a souvenir from the place, and that I'd split it with him if he went with me. All of this was total crap, of course, but I want to see what was in there, and I definitely want these dreams to stop. "You know, you're lucky to have a friend as brave and manly as me," Matt said, putting up his little bird chest. After what happened to those other schmucks, everyone's been avoiding this place like the plague. Yeah, but unlike all of them, you know it's just a building, I said. He gave me a funny look then. It is just a building, but you know something actually happened, he said. I was talking to my dad about it, and he said maybe a homeless guy was living there, totally deranged, and maybe he cut out Alicia's eye and kidnapped her. He stated this with the seriousness of a news anchor, recounting bits of total bullshit for the audience. I smiled at his grave expression, repressing the urge to laugh. He looked over at me disapprovingly. It could have happened, you know? Homeless people are homeless because they're crazy. My dad says so. Maybe one of them just really went crazy and started taking souvenirs off people's bodies. I guess, I said. We were most of the way through the old industrial part of town now. Shuttered factories and condemned buildings stretched out on both sides of the street. A fat limping raccoon walked lazily out of the nearby alleyway. He gave us a sideways glance, stopping for a moment, then kept on maneuvering his round frame forward. Something that Matt had said had given me pause. You know, I said, it's kind of weird that we don't have homeless people out here. We have all these empty buildings, yet most of them camp out on the sidewalks on Main Street. I've never seen a single homeless person sleeping in one of these buildings, and I've never seen one even close to the Leatherman building. It's like they have some kind of sixth sense to avoid the place. Clearly, they're smarter than you and me, Matt muttered. We were walking past the rusty metal chain link fence around the property. He looked pale and his eyes were wide. Are you sure you want to do this? Right then, my instinct screamed at me to run. Yes, I said simply, walking in first, taking the flashlight out of my pocket. I need to know for sure. Either way, I'd like evidence. Either it is my imagination, or something supernatural actually exists in this building. An old musty smell permeated the huge hallway. I looked up and down it, wondering what was missing. Then I realized it had no graffiti. It had been the only abandoned building I'd ever been in without tons of graffiti scrawled on the inside. In some places, the walls had begun to buckle, and whole sections were crumbling and coming down. Farther ahead, the ceiling had collapsed inward, blocking half the main hallway off. Downstairs, lights started turning on, and the entire building started to come to life. I looked at Matt, who was looking dazed. Bro, what the hell is that? He asked. I had no idea. Someone's in here with us, I said. Let's go check it out. He looked at me like I was insane. Are you mad? What if it's cops? What if it's tweakers pulling out all the metal? We'll be quiet and just peek around the corner, I said. I think we're meant to see this. Don't you want to know what's going on here? He scowled. I'd much rather go home alive, he said, but he followed me reluctantly. There was a rhythmic hum coming from the floors now, as if machinery were coming to life. A sign, dirty and covered in spider webs, pointed to a staircase on the right. I looked down it, seeing bright light flood into the stairwell corridor. Despite the fact that there was no electricity running to this building, we started down the staircase to the basement level. There was the smell of ozone in the air, a cyclical rhythmic humming that popped and buzzed. I took a deep breath, wondering what I could see down there. Then I poked my head around the corner. There were conveyor belts stretching against the basement, their legs embedded into the cracked concrete floors. Beams and pillars ran up the floor to the ceiling every 10 feet or so, and it looked like there were countless workers just sitting on each side of the conveyor belts, sitting in crooked wooden chairs with splintering legs and backs. But it was the workers who caught my attention most of all. They looked strange. Does something look off to you? I whispered to Matt, who had been standing behind me only moments earlier, but I got no reply. I figured he was too engrossed in the bizarre nature of what we were seeing to respond. The workers, if that's what they were, looked blurred, as if in an overexposed picture with a long shutter speed. Their skin appeared to writhe and crackle. Some of their heads constantly turned from side to side, and their limbs, all of them appeared to be missing limbs. I saw pale white bodies without arms, without legs, even without heads. But they all still continued working in unison, moving in that jerky, blurred way. "Jesus, Matt, do you see?" I asked suddenly, my eyes widening. "Do you see what they're doing?" I looked forward in horror as I saw human bodies rolled down the conveyor belts. The people were still alive. They were naked, many of them crying and covered in blood. As they passed by the workers, the blurred hands quickly took pieces of their skin off. Glistening sheets of it were raised by other workers, walking along between the lines, and they would give an admiring look at the large pieces of skin, smiling eerily as their heads writhed from side to side and blurred in my vision. And I saw one of the kids from my dream, the kids from the missing persons posters, all in the corner. They were huddled, emaciated, with wide staring eyes. They trembled and cowered as some of the workers came over to grab them and throw them on the belts. I turned to get the hell out of there, and that was when I realized Matt was no longer behind me. I caught a glimpse of something dark and massive moving at the top of the stairs, disappearing around the corner. I was alone. I know I should have stayed and looked for Matt, but instead, I ran. I got out of that place and went home and hid under my blankets. I thought 13 was old enough to deal with this, but it has gone way beyond what I thought. Matt's parents are calling. My parents stand at the bottom of the stairs, my mother holding the landline in her thin hand, my father looking disturbed. They tell me that Matt is missing, that he never came home last night. What should I tell them? Certainly not the truth. If I started talking about the things in that building, I would be forced into a psych ward before the week was up. The police stopped by and asked me a few questions. I told them all straight up lies. No, sir, I haven't seen him, and I have no idea what happened to him. But what else could I say? That he was taken by something from a nightmare? I have to go back. I have to try to rescue Matt. I shouldn't have ran like I did, but seeing those things cutting people up like that, it scared the shit out of me. Tonight, once my parents go to sleep, I'm going to sneak out, and everyone will think I'm a hero if I bring him back. If I don't, I'll probably end up as just another stupid missing kid who ended up way over his head. I went back. I made it out, but I think they're coming for me. There was something in the basement. All of the conveyor belts were gone. The lights were off. The rhythmic hum had disappeared. It was as if the other night was all a hallucination. Except for, of course, Matt is still missing. His parents are freaking out, and I can't even tell them that I know what happened to him. Kinda. Going into that building alone was terrifying. My legs felt like wood, and I kept glancing behind me every second, as if I were hearing imaginary pursuers. But I walked through to the staircase, and I saw nothing. I went down to the basement, peeking my head around the corner. It was mostly just an empty basement. Some old broken furniture and old boxes stacked in a corner. I shone my light all over and saw no one, but there was a light coming from the far corner, a faint glowing orange light. A feeling of dread came over me. I crept slowly forward, trying to find the source of that light. A faint smell of smoke and roasting meat seemed to creep through the air. Off past the line of boxes, I saw what looked like a small crater on the floor. There was a hole there with glowing fire underneath. Cracks spiderwebbed out from it in all directions for a few feet. More curious than afraid now, I peered forward and looked down. Beneath the abandoned building, there was another world. It had fire licking the walls and ground, and in the middle of this inferno, I saw Matt. His face was a map of blackish purple bruises. His head was cocked at an unnatural angle, and I saw blood pouring out of his ears and nose. He looked up at me, and the bones in his neck grated together. I saw his spine was broken, and his entire throat was crushed inwards.
"Help me,"
he croaked.
"You brought me up here. Now help me. You can't leave me. They'll come for you next."
All around him, I saw hands reaching up, the pale, jerky hands of those strange creatures. They grabbed Matt and drug him back down into the fire. I saw other horrific creatures in the flames, some laughing and insane, others shrieking in agony. Large black insectile silhouettes moved through the smoke and flames, and then, like one, they started coming up towards the hole, coming up to the building where they would be free. I ran then, and I never went back. I now know that Matt is dead. I can't sleep. Every time I look out the window, I see shapes in the front yard, blurred humanoids with missing limbs, hiding in the bushes and trees, and constantly inching closer. My son's imaginary friend had legs that bent the wrong way, like the crooked legs of a bird. He said every time his imaginary friend walked, the bones would poke out through the skin, yet he was able to move at inhumanly fast speeds, like a character in a video that has been played on fast forward. My son had named this creepy friend Mr. Grimm. Needless to say, I found his new imaginary friend to be a trifle upsetting. When I told my wife about it, she said that it wasn't just upsetting, but absolutely fucking disturbing in every way imaginable. "Why do his bones poke out through his skin?" she asked me. "That seems like fairly inappropriate imagery for a 5-year-old. Maybe it's some subconscious projection from an accident victim he saw on TV," I said thoughtfully. She rolled her eyes at this. "I don't think they show dead car crash victims with their bones sticking out of their skin on Nickelodeon," she said sarcastically. But we let it go, and continued on with our lives as normal. Johnny continued to talk about Mr. Grimm and the adventures they went on, and we just kinda got used to it. After all, children have vivid imaginations, and I wasn't the type to read into things too much. As a parent, I knew sometimes you had to just go with the flow and let them develop on their own. That's before the pets started to go missing in our neighborhood. The entire street became covered in missing posters for local cats and dogs. None of their bodies were ever found, though. I didn't know what to think about it, so I just didn't. I just continued to go to work, spend time with my wife, and enjoy life as much as I could. I would take Johnny out on weekend outings, to amusement parks or nature trails. But one time when we were hiking together, He said something rather disturbing to me. "Mr. Grimm says he knows what happens to the kitties and puppies," he told me. I looked down at him sharply. "Johnny, that's not funny," I said. "There are some sick people out there. People who kill little animals for no reason. There are people out there who kill little kids for no reason. That's why your mom and I always tell you to avoid strangers and never get in a car with anyone besides your family. And you shouldn't joke about missing puppies and kitties." "But Dad," he said plaintively, "I wasn't joking. Mr. Grimm said he took the puppies and kitties with him to his playground. He said that I could come with them one day too. He said that no one hurts puppies or kitties there, or little kids. He said we all live forever with him, and that he never lets us go, because he loves us all too much and wants us to be with him forever." I looked down at his small, serious face, waves of dread rising inside my stomach. "Johnny, Mr. Grimm isn't real," I said. "He's just an imaginary friend. That means he comes from your own mind, just like your dreams. They might feel real, but they're all inside of you." He just shook his head at this, like he couldn't believe how slow his old dad was. "You'll see soon, Daddy," he said. "Mr. Grimm is as real as you and me, maybe even realer, because he says he has been here a really long time. He says he remembers the roads before any cars were on them, back when they were all dirt. He says he remembers when horses and donkeys were the only way around. He told me about it. It's pretty weird to think about, Daddy, just how old he is. I didn't know people could live that long." "Johnny, if Mr. Grimm was a real person, and what you said was true, he would have to be over 130 years old. No one has ever lived that long. It isn't possible. Don't get carried away with this Mr. Grimm stuff, because not everyone will understand like your mom and I do. Some people might think it's a little weird." That was the end of the conversation, and we continued hiking in silence. I was deep in thought, wondering about all the strange things my son said. The next day, kids started disappearing. It started with the Crabtree boy on the next street over. From what I heard, he was playing in the backyard in his sandbox. His mother looked out the window every minute or so while she was doing dishes. She looked up, and he was gone. His toys still in the same position, his little blue baseball cap upside down on the spot where he had been sitting. Miss Crabtree sprinted out, looking around frantically and screaming his name, but he was just gone. No sign of any strangers in the neighborhood, no suspicious cars, no random leads caught by stoplight cameras or doorbell cameras. So ubiquitous in our little suburban neighborhood, there weren't even any footprints in the sandbox. Neither the boys, nor anyone else's, except for the tracks that led to the middle of the sandbox, where he had been sitting and playing. It was as if he had been raptured up into heaven in the space of 60 seconds. The police searched for weeks for that little boy, even using helicopters to search the endless woods that started at the north edge of town. Volunteers from around our county joined in, combing every square inch of woods within miles, diving into local lakes and checking abandoned buildings, and even sewers near the child's house. There was not a sign of him anywhere. It was as if he had just vanished in the flash of an eye. After weeks of no news, the attention paid to it slowly started to die down. People forgot about the grieving parents and the missing child, like they always do in these kinds of situations. I was extremely busy at work, doing research into quantum entanglement and quantum computers at our state university. My wife had left to go spend time with her father, who had dementia and cancer, and very suddenly took a turn for the worse. So I ended up having to take Johnny to work. I didn't really mind, as he was a good boy who listened and very rarely got in trouble. The Mr. Grimm thing was the only weird part of his young personality, but other than that, he was a fast learner, respectful, and acted in many ways like a child much older than himself. We entered the quantum research laboratory, his little hand holding mine tightly as he stared around with wide blue eyes. It smelled like cleaning chemicals and burning metal throughout the entire chamber, emanating even out into the hallways of the university building. My son wrinkled his tiny nose, making a comically cute face as he did so. I handed him a pair of safety glasses, putting one on myself, before starting up with his usual, childlike questioning. "Daddy, why does it smell like that?" he asked me. I shrugged. "It's a lot of machines that consume huge amounts of power," I explained simply to him. "This single building can consume as much power as hundreds of houses like ours. Some of this stuff," I indicated with a wave of my hand, showing the gleaming circular vats, the massive metal tubes, the dozens of computer monitors, the tables with entire arrays of green lasers focused on tiny chips, "is so cutting edge that we haven't found a way to make it use less electricity yet. It can entangle physical particles or make computers that can do certain processes almost millions of times faster than conventional computers." Most young children would not be able to comprehend the depth of statements like that, but Johnny was not a usual kid. His mind worked incredibly fast, and his vocabulary seemed much more developed than a normal 5-year-old's. "Okay," Johnny said simply, letting go of my hand so I could hang up our coats and put a little plastic bag of food in the fridge. It was late, past dinner time on a Friday, and so the entire lab was already deserted. I was one of the few physicists who did much of his work at night, when all the equipment was open and I had the entire building to myself. On nights like this, I could play classical music on its highest volume and just be myself. I started playing an MP3 on one of the many monitors around the lab, then began to move around and switch all the equipment on. My son sat in the corner, using colored pencils to draw while I worked. Tonight, I was using AI to try and increase the quantum entanglement from just a few particles to a small diamond. Having turned all the cameras and monitoring equipment on, I activated the processor and watched all the lasers move in unison on the nearby laboratory table. Now pointing at the diamond I had in the middle of the setup, Johnny looked up as the computers all grew louder. I motioned for him to come close, to show him the most interesting part of the entire experiment. A humming, vibrating noise began to spread throughout the floor. As the argon lasers became too bright to look at, I put an arm around Johnny, reassuring him. Suddenly, something began to go terribly wrong. The humming vibrations, which had been wave-like and measured, now began to come in chaotic pulsing waves, knocking equipment off the tables. The argon lasers began to falter and move out of position, burning holes in the tables and walls. An enormous crash of rending metal and glass came from behind me, and I quickly jumped on Johnny, tackling him to the floor and protecting him with my own body until it would all be over. As another computer station fell over, sending shards of glass flying that sliced into my left arm, leaving large droplets of blood on the floor next to us. The power finally went out, and we were submerged in blackness. All I could hear now was Johnny's heavy breathing mixing with my own. Then suddenly, I heard the skittering footsteps of something large coming from my right. Is it over?" Johnny asked in a trembling voice. "I think so, kiddo," I said reassuringly, getting off of him and slowly standing up in the pitch dark. I fumbled in my pockets for my cell phone, turning on the flashlight app and shining it around. At first, I saw only destruction. Smashed monitors, smoking computers, massive holes everywhere. I thought to myself how lucky we were that the whole place hadn't gone up in flames. As I kept turning, though, I saw something far more horrific. A small boy stood in the corner with black stringy hair. His skin looked drained of blood, white as a vampire's, and blood constantly bubbling out of his mouth, sliding down his chin in red streaks. He wore the ragged remains of what might have been a plaid shirt and jeans, but they were so bloody and torn that It was impossible to tell. His bare legs were bent the wrong way, and he started to walk towards me slowly like a bird, his knees bending backwards. The bones stuck out through his shins, calves, and thighs, and as he walked, a nauseating cracking sound echoed around the room, like bone loudly crushing and breaking against other pieces of itself. "Hi there," he said in a deep gurgling speech. "My name, as you surely know, is Mr. Grimm. I'm a friend of your son's, and I hope soon, a friend of yours." I stood there, speechless, shining my light on this abomination. He bowed slightly and waved his thin, bony arm around the room. "Sorry for the destruction, but I had to take any means to materialize, and the massive amounts of energy in this room was able to give me my physical form I needed. I couldn't keep going on as some minor poltergeist." He laughed at this, spraying tiny droplets of blood on the floor in front of him as he did so. I didn't see the humor in it. "Look," I said, putting my hands up, as if I were dealing with a rabid dog. "I'm sorry for any misunderstanding, but you need to go back to where you came from. This is not okay. My son and I cannot have what was he exactly? A monster? A demon?" Mr. Grimm waved away my objections with a flick of his hand. "That's not up to you, Jack," he said congenially. "You cannot send me back, and if you try to stop me, I will kill your son in front of you, and then I will kill you too." My son's little hand tightened on me. I felt him trembling behind me. "Daddy, I'm scared," he whispered to me in a low voice. "I want to go home." "I know, Johnny," I said quietly. "I do too. But what could I do? I had no gun, and I wasn't sure if this thing could even be killed anyway." At that moment, the backup generators kicked on, and the laboratory was filled with the glow of red emergency lights. "All right," I said, reaching a decision. "My son and I are leaving. Do not follow us." I had decided to call 911 and let the professionals deal with this. Maybe they could call in the National Guard, I thought with a small smile. They could fill this thing with enough full auto weapon fire to leave him looking like Swiss cheese. "Huh," Mr. Grimm said congenially. "I'm sorry, but I need your son." He smiled at me, an ear-to-ear grin that showed all of his bloody teeth and the countless sores on his blackened gums. "I used a lot of energy materializing. I need food. I will let you live, however, Jack." His smile widened, as if he were offering me some kind of present. "Just leave the boy, get in your car, and drive home, and you can live a full life." As he spoke, I got an idea. We were much closer to the door than Mr. Grimm. I quickly dropped my phone in my pocket, picked up a large computer, and hurled it at Mr. Grimm's broken legs. I heard a demonic cry of pain, his voice sounding like dozens of voices crying at once, all in a disharmonious shriek. Ignoring it, I picked up Johnny and ran outside the lab. The door had a number pad on it. I pressed the top button and began rotating the thumb turn away from the hinges, locking the thick wooden doors, just as something heavy crashed into it on the other side. The knob turned furiously, but it wouldn't budge without the correct numerical code. "Okay, that should buy us some time," I said quietly, grabbing Johnny's hand and running out through the blood-red emergency lights. The laboratory began erupting in a cacophony of breaking equipment as I called 911, informing them of an intruder and telling them that the man was likely armed and dangerous. Then I got Johnny to my car and we sped out of there, my adrenaline still high, my heart beating hard in my chest. The police ended up finding the laboratory destroyed, but empty. As the days went on, I wondered if the entire thing was some sort of shared delusion. But then kids started disappearing from our town and the surrounding towns at an alarming rate. I bought a gun for protection, and my neighbors and I began to do a local neighborhood watch. One time, while I was out patrolling in the middle of the night, I saw that thing again, Mr. Grimm. I could tell it was him instantly from the way he walked, the crunching of shattered bones, and the superhuman speed as he disappeared into the backyard of a nearby house. I followed him quietly, checking that the safety on my gun was off. I saw a child exiting the back door of a house as Mr. Grimm crept in the bushes. The child looked hypnotized, his eyes totally blank. Mr. Grimm waved his hands and clicked his tongue, and a small spark of light in the middle of the backyard expanded to show a massive brightly colored playground. Even though it was night here, on the playground it was daytime, and I saw countless kids in it. Some of them were hung in nooses by their necks from the monkey bars. Others were buried alive up to their heads in the sandbox. He even had a few hung up to wooden beams on the playset. They all had their mouths opened in a shared and silent scream as the hypnotized child walked quietly towards the vision. "No, stop!" I said, raising my gun to point it directly at Mr. Grimm's head. He snarled like a rabid dog at me, beginning to run at me with superhuman speed, his bent legs snapping and popping, and I fired. His head exploded in a shower of black rotted flesh and maggots, the smell of decomposing meat filling the air. Behind him, the vision slowly closed back into a pinprick of light, then went out entirely. I called the police, telling them the truth, keeping an eye on the strange demonic body of Mr. Grimm as I did so. It wasn't the police that ended up showing up, but some secretive federal agency that quickly took possession of the body and swore me to secrecy, giving me a check for $100,000 in exchange for signing an NDA that stated that I would never tell anyone about the supernatural events that occurred in the last few weeks. I gladly took the check and signed the document. After all, who would believe me? As the sun set, I saw the first silhouettes across the field. My grandfather sat, smoking and reading on the rocking chair in the back of the house. I ran to him, scared and uncertain. "There's people coming, Grandpa," I said. He flicked his cigarette on the ashtray, put down his book, and looked straight into my eyes. "Where? Who?" he asked, his clear blue eyes searching my face. "I don't know, but there's dozens of them, I think," I said. I couldn't see their faces or anything. They just looked like shadows moving across the field. He stood up quickly, knocking the ashtray off the small table to his right. Cigarette butts went flying all over the floor, and a cloud of ashes got swept up by the wind. "Where's Grandma?" he asked, his face growing grave. A crease appeared across his forehead, and he looked around quickly. "I don't know, but they're coming fast," I said. He began limping inside the house, his bad leg slowing him down. He looked out the front window and gasped. Quietly, I came up behind him and stared out at the field, covered in deep oranges and red hues from the sun, covered up by clouds as the day rolled into night. "We need to find Grandma right now," my grandfather said. He went to the kitchen and unlocked the safe, taking out his rifle, which he mostly used to kill coyotes and foxes who hunted his chickens or attacked the baby pigs out in the barn. "I don't get what it is," I said, staring out the window. It seemed like hundreds of black spots now approached, spread out over the field. The ones closest, I saw, were not human at all. They walked on their hands and feet, with shining black skin stretched thinly over their bones and joints. Silver tendrils of saliva rolled down from their mouths, and every time one of them got too close to one another, they would begin to snap and bite and hiss, their sharp serrated teeth flashing with every bite. Their eyes had this strange look of a goat's eyes with rectangular pupils placed on each side of their face. It looked like a small island of light in the darkness of space. The rest of their naked bodies seemed to suck in the light, causing a light shimmering on their reptilian skin. "Oh God, they're back," my grandfather said. "Last time they came, they killed off half the town." "Where's Grandma?" I asked, a current of anxiety running through my body now. My grandpa shook his head. "I wish I knew," he said. "When's the last time you saw her?" "She was weeding in the garden and then said it would be dark soon and we should start putting the tools away," I said, suddenly remembering. "She's probably out in the shed right now." My grandfather grabbed the gun and ran out of the door. At least, as much as he could run. It ended up being more of a fast, limping walk. By this point, the first of the creatures had nearly reached the front of the house. We went out the back door, looking towards the shed. I saw the light on inside and the door wide open. "Grandma!" I screamed. My grandfather jumped, then put his free hand over my mouth, holding the gun loosely in the other. "You idiot," he hissed. "Don't draw them near. Keep quiet. Do you want to die?" But it was too late. I heard growling and snapping from the front of the house, and the smashing of windows and doors. Then, a few of the abominations came running around the side of the old farmhouse. Attracted by my screaming, they hopped in a strange way, their abnormally long and thin arms going between their bodies, as their legs pushed them forward in constant jumping motions. They moved fast now, much faster than me, and in the growing darkness, they seemed little more than a blur. My grandfather grabbed my hand and we ran towards the shed, slamming the door behind us. I looked back in the corner and saw my grandmother, totally oblivious to everything going on, sorting through tools and small seed containers. "We need more basil and rosemary," she said to herself. "Never have enough seeds, it seems." She looked back at us, smiling. "Have you come to help? I'm sorry to say, I'm nearly done." "No," my grandfather said, raising his gun for emphasis. "We're being attacked. You need to stay with us. Remember what killed the Kellers and the Cavendish family and their dogs and cats and cattle?" My grandmother's face went pale, and I thought she might pass out for a moment. She grabbed her chest, breathing hard. "But that was 30 years ago," she said. "How could they be back?" My grandfather just shook his head. "They're here," he said, as if on cue. Someone started smashing on the locked door of the shed. Then another pair of hands joined in, and another. It sounded like a riot had broken out on the other side of the wall. My grandfather raised the gun, as if to start shooting through the door. Then he checked his pocket and frowned. "Damn it, should have grabbed more ammo," he said, rifling through his few bullets in his overalls. He looked like he had grabbed a couple dozen from the safe. Though even with perfect aim, that wouldn't make much of a dent in the crowd of beasts I had seen. "Get out the back door," my grandmother said. "We'll go escape to the woods. We can come out at the Jeffersons' house if we take the dirt trail." Fine, my grandfather said, pushing me forwards and grabbing my grandmother's hand. He looked out the side door of the shed, the beast still pounding on the front door, and I heard the wood beginning to splinter and give way. "Coast is clear," he said quickly, and we ran out through the field and towards the woods. Behind us, I heard the door fall, the last rotten beam shattering as the black creatures moved inside. "What if they're already at the Jeffersons' place?" I asked my grandfather in a low tone. We ran through the corn plants, though my grandmother and grandfather couldn't move very fast. I could hear the creatures howling with rage and sniffing the air from the shed behind us. "Then we'll deal with it," my grandfather whispered. I heard the first heavy booming steps as the creatures gave chase, running over the corn plants and knocking them down, with a wispy echoing sound. By the time we got to the forest, the creatures had circled us. Some had run ahead, and some followed close behind, but they kept a distance of 10 feet or so, as if simply watching and stalking. My grandfather stopped and raised his gun. With a deafening boom, he shot at the first silhouette he saw on the trail. The bullet went high, and with a deep growl, the creature disappeared into the brush. My grandfather motioned us forward, and we walked down the trail, close together in a group. Anytime he saw the slightest movement, he would shoot in that direction. One of the creatures seemed to have been hit, and on the trail, I saw black blood shining under the moonlight. Drops disappeared into ferns and prickers that surrounded the trail, and for a moment, I thought I saw eyes gleaming through the brush. Then they were gone. My grandmother reached out for my hand. "It's gonna be okay," she said reassuringly, patting me. "We've survived this before. We'll make it this time." My grandfather shook his head, but he said nothing. As we got to the Jeffersons' place, I saw lights shining in every window. Hope soared in me until I saw the bodies strewn across the porch. The mother had her head ripped off. I saw a body with a blood-stained dress, the neck a mess of gore and bones. Looking up, I saw the head staged neatly on a metal fence post, the spike driving into the throat. Her eyes looked blank, her expression a mask of horror. The mouth stood slightly open, and the lips looked blue. The rest of the family lay around her, disemboweled, their eyes ripped out, the soft flesh eaten off of their faces. My grandmother pulled me to the side, looking over at my grandfather. Then she began laughing. He turned to her, confused. My pets, she said in an insane voice. "They're here for you, though they take whatever they want. Hungry work, you know." "What?" my grandfather asked, a certainty and bitterness crossing his eyes as he stared at his wife with distrust. "I know you were sleeping with Miss Keller," my grandmother said, her eyes turning black and her features savage. She grinned, showing all her teeth. My grandfather stepped back, muttering excuses and saying how it wasn't true. "You killed them?" he asked. "And you did all this?" "I did what I had to do, to protect me and my grandson from monsters like you," she said, and with a nod of her head, the creatures came out of the woods, grabbing my grandfather and dragging him away. He shot his gun, emptying the clip and blowing apart the heads of 3 or 4, but a dozen more followed from behind, hissing and biting at the air. I heard his screams and the breaking of his bones as they ravaged him, biting and stomping on him, ripping at his throat and face. Soon, he disappeared into the darkness, and the last gurgling screams echoed back to us. My grandmother turned to me, her normal placid friendly expression back on her face. "Well," she said, "that was quite a day. I could really go for some ice cream." And so, we turned around and left, and I never asked her about any of it. My grandmother recently died, and I found a book in the attic while cleaning out the farmhouse. It looked like it had a cover made of human skin, and in the middle it said, in blood-red letters, summoning spells and necromancy. There was a screeching outside, like the wind through the castles of hell. I sat straight up, looking out of the window. I saw a strobing, flickering cascade of red, orange, and yellow hues. For a moment, I thought I was still stuck in some sort of inescapable nightmare. A gaunt oval face stared in through the window. It didn't register how bizarre this was for a few seconds, until I remembered I lived on the 3rd floor. I jumped out of bed. Long bony fingers curled into a clenched fist, tapped lightly on the glass outside, dragging a sharp knuckle across the window. From his eyes, there spun a web of luminescent lights, flashing like fire. I looked straight into them for a moment, feeling blinded as if I had looked straight into the sun. I quickly turned away, seeing shapes streaming past my closed eyelids. From the explosion of light they had suffered, everything looked white, with the bare silhouette of grinning creatures with spiral eyes burned into the back of my retinas. I stumbled away, blindly hitting the nightstand and sending the lamp smashing to the ground, breaking it. I ran into my father's room, crying and screaming about the monster outside my window. He got up, sighing, but he grabbed his pistol and went into my room. A few moments later, he called me. "Come here, Roland," he said in a gruff, harsh tone. "I want to show you something." With my heart still hammering, I wandered back into the room. In the window, I saw melted into the glass 2 swirling spiral patterns. Hints of red, yellow, and orange still glimmered in the circles, like cinders sparkling from a bonfire. "Did you fuck up this window?" he asked, clenching his fist. "And you broke your goddamn lamp?" The gun laid at his side. "No, Dad. I swear. There was someone out there," I started to say. A stinging slap smacked me across the face. "Don't you lie to me, you little shit," he growled. "I work hard for this family, and you have your vapors and little lunatic episodes and wake me up for no reason?" I felt warm rivers of blood stream from my nose. I cringed back, trying to avoid what I knew was coming. But my father was extremely fast, and he had built up muscles over years of labor. Old man strength, my friend Frankie called it. I felt a fist smash into my stomach. I doubled over, retching. He elbowed me hard in the back, and I fell to the ground, gasping and crawling away. "Now don't fucking wake me up again," he yelled as he walked out, slamming the door behind him. I couldn't sleep after that. I kept looking out of the window, but that night, the eldritch creature didn't show his face again. I watched the sun rise a few hours later, totally exhausted. I got up, getting ready to go to the middle school. I felt as if I was walking through water, with everything seeming slow and unreal. I noticed a lot of kids were missing from our classes. In some of my classes, nearly half of the kids were absent. I asked a couple friends about it. Most of them didn't know any more than I did, but a few had heard rumors. I heard there's an outbreak of some weird disease going around. My buddy Frank told me in the hallway. My brother works as an EMT and he said 911 was getting flooded with calls. He wouldn't tell me exactly what was wrong with the people, but he says it was horrible. "What made it so horrible?" I asked. He shrugged. "They kept bleeding from their eyes, their noses, their mouths, everything. I don't know what the hell causes that. Maybe Ebola or some secret Chinese virus. But the doctors at the hospitals couldn't find anything wrong with the people, besides the fact that they were bleeding to death for no reason." "So did they die?" I asked, horrified. He nodded. "Yeah, a few. Most of them didn't, though. I don't really know the details, man." He was pretty vague about it. He looked more scared than I've ever seen him before, though. And he's dealt with a lot of shit in that job. Lots of dead people, gunshot victims, overdoses, everything. But he said he's never seen anything like this before. That night, I fell asleep quickly from exhaustion. I awoke, confused, streams of light flashing in my eyes. I looked out the window and saw the same creature from before, floating in the air. His face looked stretched out, like a giant egg. 2 cyclonic eyes sent out streams of light. spinning like spiral galaxies in the void. The hues of fire that shone from his eyes looked beautiful and hypnotizing, but also blinding. I saw a massive grinning mouth that constantly chattered, and 2 small reptilian holes for a nose. His teeth looked very small and straight, like a child's teeth, but he had far too many of them. Hundreds of the small white pearls shone in that grin, embedded in sickly yellow gums marked with black spots. From his back, 2 black raggedy wings stretched out, filled with holes and rippling slowly in the breeze. They reminded me of a bat's wings, jet black with sores that leaked dark fluid down to the grass far below. I watched this inhuman blood drip off the sharp angles of the wings, thick like oil and glistening with rainbows. They ended in a point like a scalpel.
"Don't be afraid, Roland. My name is Mr. Welcome,"
the creature said in a voice like thunder.
"And I am your guardian angel. I am here to protect you from the evil that now invade your town. For without my help, you will most surely die."
Mr. Welcome told me many things. His booming voice seemed to shake the floor, and I wondered if he would wake my father up. But Mr. Welcome assured me that only the person he spoke to would hear him.
"Our communication occurs in your mind and my mind. Though it may sound like it comes from outside you, it is within you. You might hear your heart beating in your ears, after all, but that heart is still inside you, and I am the same. For you and I are one. In a way, I am closer to you than your own heartbeat. I can see all the dark pits in your soul, where black twisted things grow in the shadows. And we all have that, Roland. It should be embraced, not shunned, but also as your guardian angel." He said, "I have to tell you some bad news. There is an outbreak of Satan's leprosy in your town."
I repressed an urge to laugh. "Satan's leprosy?" I asked, bemused. "Is that an actual disease?" The more I stared into Mr. Welcome's eyes, the more I felt myself trusting him, opening up to him. I couldn't believe how scared I had been before, in an alien kind of way. He looked beautiful, and the more I watched him, the more I felt myself accepting his presence. And yet, a small piece of my mind far away in the back still questioned many things he claimed, including being my guardian angel. But the more he spoke, the more I felt myself slipping away and falling under his spell.
"Oh yes, Roland, yes," he said slowly. "Satan's leprosy is the worst disease. The mark of Cain, the touch of the devil."
His eyes flickered and strobed, sending shadows like black grasping hands dancing across the room. Everything seemed dreamy and unreal.
"I will do all I can to protect you, Roland,"
Mr. Welcome said.
"But soon, you may have to start fighting on your own. You may have to start fighting on the side of good. You may have to prove your skill in killing demons. Do you think you can kill some evil, filthy demons, Roland?"
A series of visions ran through my mind. Nights of a holy crusade, saints sending out evil spirits, priests burning witches. "I can try," I said, giving Mr. Welcome a friendly smile. The next day, school got canceled. Things began to grow strange in my town, and not just because of Mr. Welcome. I started seeing suspicious black SUVs with tinted windows. They were hanging around the borders of town that morning. And then my friend Frankie ran over to my house, knocking frantically on the door. My dad was a mechanic who owned his own shop and had already left for work. So with school now canceled, I found myself home alone for the day. Frankie's dark brown eyes looked excited and wild. They gleamed with terror and adrenaline. "My parents," he said breathlessly. "There's something wrong with my family. They won't stop bleeding. And their eyes, their faces, they're all wrong, Roland. Something bad is happening." I thought back to Mr. Welcome's warning about the Satan leprosy, and my stomach churned with anxiety. "What do you mean, their eyes, their faces?" I asked,
Taking a step back, he had sweat running down his chubby face. His long hair hung over his forehead in wet clumps. He was breathing fast, bent slightly over. It's like their eyes slid halfway off their faces during the night. When they woke up, their faces were sideways. Their mouths drooped down to the right and their noses looked like stretched out worms. Their bodies were just turning into jelly, and the blood wouldn't stop coming out of their eyes and mouths and noses. It soaked the floor. He began to cry, hyperventilating. I thought he might pass out. You've got to be kidding me. A sense of disgust and nausea rising in my abdomen. No disease does that to the human body. That's physically impossible. He shook his head. It wasn't just my family. My neighbors too. Their kids got sick. I tried calling Angela and Mike and a few other people, and none of them were answering their phones. At that moment, I heard the revving of many engines. I saw black SUVs with tinted windows driving slowly down every street. They began to play a pre-recorded robotic speech from some hidden speakers. A 24-hour curfew is now in effect for this area, a cold robotic female voice said. This town is now quarantined. Anyone found on the streets will be subjected to immediate arrest. Return to your homes and stay inside. Do not leave for any reason. Agents will soon come to talk to you and explain everything. Please remain calm. Return to your homes and stay inside. Do not leave for any reason. I pulled Frankie aside, slamming the door and locking the deadbolt. I had a feeling my father would not be coming home today. The sun set early that day, sending red streaks like blood from a crime scene across the clouds. Frankie and I had sat at the table in the kitchen. The cable had gone down now, so there was no TV. Moreover, our phones no longer worked, but the electricity kept running. We were eating the perishable foods first, in case it also went out. I had a package of sliced turkey, mayo, cheddar, lettuce, bread, and milk. We kept eating and drinking as much as we could while we waited, not knowing how long we could end up trapped here or whether food would come in. While we ate, I told Frankie about Mr. Welcome. He has eyes like an angel, I told him. At first, I was scared, but after he talked to me and explained everything, well, I don't feel scared anymore. Frankie gave me a weird look. I thought angels had white wings and swords and looked like Leonardo DiCaprio. Frankie said, frowning. Your angel sounds like some sort of monster. No offense. I laughed. That's all Hollywood crap, I said. Mr. Welcome said all angels look like him. Maybe you'll see your own guardian angel before this is all over. Frankie shuddered. If he looks anything like your guardian angel, I really hope not, he said. And what did you mean by killing evil, filthy? A loud slam at the door made us both jump. I got up from the table and ran over to the peephole. Standing in front of the door, I saw Frankie's older brother, Jesse. He stood in his medic's uniform still, splotches of blood staining the white cloth. Tiny splatters covered his hands and feet. His dark eyes shone with fear and excitement. He ran a blood-stained hand over his freshly shaven head. I ripped the door open, noticing how black and empty the sky looked behind him. Jesse, what are you doing? I asked, surprised. He pushed past me. Is my brother here? Where's Frankie? He said, a note of panic in his voice. Frankie came out of the kitchen, a half-eaten sandwich still clutched in one hand. Oh, thank God, Frankie. You're still alive. Yeah, Frankie said through a mouthful of turkey, chewing slowly and raising an eyebrow. So far, so good. My goal is to live forever after all, and I've done a pretty good job up to now. Stop fucking around, Jesse yelled, making us both jump. Do you two idiots not know what's going on outside? Everyone is dying. We need to get out of town immediately. Look, the roads are blocked off, but I don't think they've been blocked off in the woods yet. At least, I hope not. The government agents or whatever they are still organizing, and we need to get out of town before the town gets fully surrounded. There's a deer trail next to the wit school that leads to the highway. It's probably 8 or 9 miles, but we don't have a goddamn choice. We need to follow it and get out of town before everyone gets locked in and slaughtered like pigs."
"What do you mean, everyone is dying? How's Mom and Dad?"
Frankie asked, his eyes growing wet. Jesse just shook his head, his earring of a snake fang jumping back and forth. "We need to go, right now. Hurry up, both of you. Grab food and water and anything else you need. Are there any guns in your house? We really need guns and ammo, as much as possible. I have my .38 on me," he said, raising his shirt to show a holstered pistol. "But I only have one spare magazine. That's not gonna cut the mustard." I nodded.
"My dad keeps a few guns here," I said. "He's always keeping his Colt on him though. But I think we have a 12-gauge shotgun and a crappy little .22 upstairs. He usually keeps a box of buckshot and 22 bullets for target shooting."
I shrugged. "I guess that's better than nothing." Jesse groaned. "A .22? He asked, narrowing his eyes. "Really? We'll go grab it." I got the guns from my father's closet, bringing down all the ammo I could find, which only amounted to 2 partially empty boxes. Jesse groaned even louder when he saw that. "Okay, which one of you is a better shot?" he asked me and Frankie. We looked at each other.
"I guess I am, at least with a BB gun,"
Frankie said. Jesse shoved a .22 and ammo in his direction, giving me the shotgun and remaining buckshot. "Then you should take the shotgun," Jesse said to me. "You only need to point in the general direction and shoot. It'll spray pellets that'll rip through skin like butter."
"Why do we need guns?" I asked, feeling anxious.
"You haven't even told us what's happening." Jesse looked up sharply. "Haven't I? Well, there's not much time. We need to go now. I can tell you on the way." We walked out into the dark, moonless night. I saw the glinting of many teeth in the shadows of the backyard. "Mr. Welcome," I cried, relieved. Jesse and Frankie spun to look at the creature. He stepped out of a hidden alcove next to the chimney, his emaciated body standing 10 feet tall. His eyes started spinning with their hypnotizing light. His bat-like wings lazily writhed up and down in the light breeze. "I'm so happy to see you." Jesse and Frankie backed up slowly, their eyes filled with horror. "Roland," Mr. Welcome said. "I would never leave your side, Roland. I am here to protect you." I walked forward, as if sleepwalking, putting my arms out to hug Mr. Welcome. He put his hands on my neck, pulling me forwards. They felt like cold melting gloves of candle wax pressed against my skin. As I hugged his flesh tightly, I felt blood draining from his rotting skin, like soapy water from a wrung-out sponge. I sensed the dark, oily fluid running down my bare hands and arms, smelled the rancid odor like rotting meat. But still, I only felt total love for Mr. Welcome. "Roland," a deep, growling voice said from behind me. I turned, seeing my father scaling the back fence. He looked at Jesse and Frankie, dismissing them with his eyes. Then he turned to me and Mr. Welcome. He had his Colt revolver in one trembling hand. "Step back from the demon." I looked closely at my father. Blood streamed from his eyes and ears, his mouth and nose. His eyes began to slant, as if the skin had melted at an angle off of his face. His words came out slurred, his lips swollen and asymmetrical. "Don't you see what it is, Roland?" My father cried louder. "Look at it. Look at the goddamn thing. It's not your friend." He fired a shot, but his trembling hand couldn't aim for shit. I saw Frankie's chest explode in a blossoming flower of blood. Frankie grabbed at the bullet hole, surprise coming over his face. He fell back. "Now's the time, Roland." Mr. Welcome's voice roared through my mind. "Kill the demons. Kill these filthy, disgusting demons. Shoot them in the head. Both of them." I raised the shotgun and fired twice. Mr. Welcome and I walked down the deer trail, hand in hand. Love filled my heart, and I felt a sense of peace. I knew I was protected. He had found a couple of agents in the forest, trying to monitor the trail. When they saw us, they raised their guns and shouted, but Mr. Welcome flew forwards, his wings beating the air like mini cyclones. He grabbed both of their heads and twisted. I heard a sound like the snapping of tree branches during an ice storm, and they fell down, their faces backwards. I know Mr. Welcome comes from God. I have resolved myself to follow him. Like a holy knight on a crusade, Mr. Welcome is my guardian angel, and his voice always guides me to safety, a voice like rushing water. I remember the first time I saw the man, the thing with the face like melting wax. I knew he had many masks and many names. He followed our family for years, and from father to son, mother to daughter, the fear and terror of the faceless man got passed down. Every time he came, he would have a different face. The first time I saw him, he looked like a withered old Asian man, leaning heavily on a wooden cane with a silver top. Our front door stood wide open. I saw my mother and father standing there, their faces as pale as ghosts, as they looked down upon the stranger. I couldn't have been older than 11 years old, but the memory is still as sharp as a butcher's knife stuck in my brain. I walked forwards from the living room. The cartoon noise is still blaring loudly in the background. The man looked past them and straight at me. He squinted his eyes and grinned. "Another lamb. So pretty and young," he mused. "Isn't it a shame when a child is taken so early in life? And yet God kills children every day. I heard last month a hurricane blew an entire school down and killed 100 of the little bastards in one swift go. So perhaps God will forgive me for my small sins, my taking of a few here and there, to keep my appetite satiated." "Get out of here," my father snarled through gritted teeth. He clenched his fists until the knuckles turned white, looking as if he would strike out at any moment. "Do you know who I am?" the faceless man asked in a whispery voice. Then he began chuckling. It sounded like someone trying to laugh with a slit throat, a harsh gurgling sound that raised goosebumps all the way up and down my body. My father slammed the door quickly, locking the deadbolts. I fingered the silver cross my mother had given me nervously. I always did when I was anxious. Feeling it lying there cold against my skin helped bring me back to the moment. My father turned to look at us with panic-stricken eyes. I heard light knocking on the door behind him as the demonic laughter continued to grow louder until it became all I could hear. Then, without warning, it cut off. When I looked out the peephole on the front door, I saw the front stoop stood empty. "Get my gun," my father said to my mother. She left the room, quietly sobbing as she went. Sunlight from the warm summer sky continued to stream in through the windows. What a beautiful day, I thought to myself. Such a beautiful day, and maybe my last. Then I saw a shadow cross in front of the living room window. I saw someone peeking in, with wide, excited eyes. A grin like a skull spread across his leathered old face. As I watched, the face began to drip and contort as it continued to smile. It started slowly around the lips and eyes, and then it began speeding up. Within seconds, I saw the flesh running down his cheeks and chin in rivulets, dripping like flesh-colored wax. Behind the mask he wore, I caught a glimpse of something horrible, before new streams of flesh rolled over it from his scalp and forehead. Then the last of the human skin dripped off, and I found myself staring into the face of hell. I could never explain the true horror of the thing lurking behind its costume of human skin. It felt like staring into a pus-filled wound with maggots writhing around the edges, or maybe like falling into a mass grave. Some of its body seemed flipped inside out, with the glistening muscle on the outside, but the bloody demonic face was far more disturbing. It had eyes like two smoldering cigarette burns. Its mouth was a slashed, disgusting thing. The lips looked eaten away, with ragged patches of flesh surrounding them that seemed to make the smile seem much larger, reminding me of how a clown would do his makeup. I saw that grinning mouth filled with countless needle-like sharp teeth, above black sore-ridden gums that writhed and shivered in its lipless mouth. Even through the window, a smell like sulfur and reeking spoiled meat filtered into the house, seeming to fill the air like a physical presence. Its body looked flipped inside out. I could see the quivering muscle on its skinless figure. It looked deathly thin, and veins ran along the outside of its face and body like thick, dark worms, pulsating with each beat of the satanic heart that lay inside that thing's chest, emanating sickness and evil through every pore of its gleaming body. As it stared into my soul with its black lidless eyes, I saw in that face all the worst nightmares of the universe. I saw mountains of corpses festering under a hot sun, black holes eating worlds as masses screamed. I saw mothers drowning their children in bathtubs, and animals eating each other alive. I saw into eternity, and it looked so dark and empty that I fell to my knees, pleading, "Make it stop, make it stop," I cried, tears streaming down my face. My father ran in with his shotgun raised, but when I looked back up, the window was empty. Yet the visions continued to run through my mind like a movie, atrocity after atrocity, and somehow, it all connected back to the faceless man. After a few seconds of utter silence, that deep gurgling voice rang out, making us all jump. It seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, all at once, reverberating throughout the room. It said something that made my father waver on his feet, a strange verse, but one I remember by heart to this day. Here is Belladonna, the Lady of the Rocks, the Lady of Situations. Here is the man with 3 staves, and here the wheel, and here is the one-eyed merchant, and this card, which is blank, is something he carries on his back, which I am forbidden to see. I do not find the hanged man. After that, we barricaded the doors and locked all the windows. I knew it wouldn't keep the faceless man out. He could easily just smash through a window, and perhaps he wouldn't even need to do that. Maybe he could pass inside the house anytime he wanted. And yet, if so, why hadn't he? "So, it started again," my mother said, looking at my father with a powerful intensity in her eyes. "He has come back again for a sacrifice." My father nodded slowly. "What do you mean, a sacrifice?" I asked, my child's mind not comprehending the magnitude of the situation yet. My father hesitated. "He eats the souls of people," my father said. "He and my great-grandfather drew up a contract long ago, and ever since, our family has had great wealth. You're young, so you don't really understand fully yet. But not everyone lives in mansions like us. Not everyone vacations in Paris and Buenos Aires during the summer vacation. Not everyone has a garage full of Porsches and Mercedes. So why don't you just tell him no?" I asked in my childish way. "We don't need all this money." The left side of my father's face began twitching. He stomped towards me, shouting as tears ran down his face. "I don't give a shit about the money," he cried. "The deal was drawn in blood and cursed from the first day. Do you think if I could get him to go away by giving him everything I own, I wouldn't? I would do it in a heartbeat. I would live in a goddamn trailer and eat instant noodles if I had to. But there's no escape." He looked around, as if expecting to see the faceless man standing right behind him. He began looking out of the window, seeing nothing but a bright summer's day. "We need to go," my mother whispered. "Now, let's just take Susan and go. He won't find us if we keep moving." "He'll find us," my father said, looking defeated. Tears continued to stream down his face. He looked like a defeated man. He always does. But fuck it, let's go. We'll take the bastard on a run around the world. We took off from the property, and my father told me about the deal as we flew out of town in an expensive Mercedes, redlining the accelerator. I thought more than once he would crash and kill us all, in his wild frenzy to put distance between us and the faceless man. "Once every 50 years, my father said. He comes. He has his pick of the litter, as he calls it. He takes one child from our family, and in exchange, our wealth is guaranteed for the next 50 years. Even during the Great Depression, our family didn't suffer, except, of course, the periodic abduction of children. He makes the parents watch, as he takes the soul of the child into himself. I don't know what kind of foul magic it involves, but from what I've read in the diaries of my grandfather, it is a very painful ritual that involves skinning the child alive and rubbing their body with special herbs. Then he makes them walk, totally skinned and bleeding to death, until they collapse. And that's when he takes the soul. He sucks it out of their eyes. It looks like thin wisps of light when it finally goes. I shook inwardly in horror. No one would ever allow that to happen to their kid, I said confidently. My father shook his head. You act as if we have a choice, he said. The first time, he comes politely, knocks on the door, and tells the parents it's time to fulfill the contract. If they say no, then he leaves. But he always comes back, and the next time, he won't be polite, and he won't leave. He'll come into the house when we're sleeping, torture me and your mother to death, slit our throats, and take you anyway. He's tireless. He doesn't age, he doesn't sleep, and as far as I know, he can't die. How can we fight against such an evil? By going to the moon? But why would great-grandpa make a deal like that anyway? I asked. Because at the time, he had 10 children and all of them were starving. A few had dysentery, and he didn't have a penny to his name at the time. He chose to sacrifice one and give it to the faceless man to save the other 9. My father shrugged. I don't know if we can understand it. I certainly don't agree with it. I'm not sure he realized at the time that our family would suffer eternally afterwards, and that the contract could not be voided except through death. He laughed bitterly. We should have just let our family line die out. Maybe that would have solved the problem. What about those words at the end, Dad? I asked. What did those mean? Oh, that's just an old famous poem. My grandfather used to recite it to me before he shot himself. He loved T.S. Eliot and thought that the poem would have some relevance to our problems. For some reason, he never got over the loss of his son to the faceless man. You see, never. He used to wake up screaming in the night. He tried to drink his memories away, but in the end, my father braked suddenly, bringing the car to a full stop. I looked up, seeing forests on both sides of us. We hadn't traveled long. A hitchhiker stood at the edge of the road, in grimy blue jeans and a bright tie-dye shirt. His long hair rippled around him as he stood with his thumb out, but his face had started to drip and melt. We all saw it and froze. My father reached down below his seat and pulled out the black shotgun. He ran out of the car like a madman, his eyes blazing with anger and terror. Get out of here, he cried as if a rabid animal. Then he raised the gun and fired. The faceless man's tie-dye shirt burst into shreds as buckshot tore into it. The faceless man smiled, raised his hand to us in a wave, and disappeared. The clothes fell limply to the grass below, now totally empty. My father shook his head grimly and turned around to come back to the car. A dark shape zoomed out of the forest, holding a sharp knife. Before my father could turn, he raised it to his throat and pulled. My mother screamed, getting out of the car to go help my father, but he was dead. Even as a child, I knew it. I could see the knife had practically severed his head from his body, except for the spine, and a thin bit of flesh hanging off the back. Blood poured out, flooding down his chest as he stood there for a moment, uncomprehending. Then he began to fall forwards, and his head snapped back, revealing the gore, muscles and ligaments beneath. I watched as my mother ran to his side, panic-stricken. The faceless man looked on with glee, laughing and shrieking. His black eyes blazed with an inner light as he looked towards me and grinned, showing the hundreds of needle-sharp teeth behind that sore of a mouth. My mother looked at him, trying to grab the gun from my father's stiff hands, but the faceless man didn't even flinch. He ran forwards, his sleek, bloody body as fast as a greyhound's. He opened his mouth wide and bit at my mother's face. I saw teeth bite into her skin, and he began to shake his head like a dog, ripping and shredding. Her face became a mask of gore, and I screamed in the car, nearly throwing up. But something inside told me I needed to move. I wasn't a stupid kid after all. I wasn't going to die here next to some woods in the middle of nowhere. I ran out of the back seat and jumped into the driver's seat. I had never driven a car, but it was, after all, an automatic. It didn't take much intelligence to put it in drive and hit the gas pedal. Of course, I didn't really know how to drive, and I nearly hit a tree. I skidded, turning the wheel, and with 2 bumps, I accidentally ran over my mother and father. The faceless man shrieked with laughter as I drove off down the road, screaming and crying in the car. I abandoned it a few hours later in the city. My father had brought a massive envelope of cash with him in the center console, and I counted it with awe. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars. I went on the run soon after, moving across the country and living on the money I found. It was 4 years later when I went to a carnival, bored, and decided to have my future read. I hadn't seen the faceless man in years, and I figured I'd lost him. If only that were true. The old woman pulled out her tarot card deck and began flipping them over one by one. "Ah," she said in a voice that seemed to deepen. "I see. Here's the man with 3 staves. And here the will. And here is the one-eyed merchant." I screamed, backing up quickly as the flesh began to drip off her face. "And this card, which is blank, is something he carries on his back, which I am forbidden to see." The last of the skin dripped off. The grinning thing beneath rose from the chair, its sleek, bloody body and black holes of eyes regarding me with glee. "Ah, yes, I am forbidden to see, but I have to see it. I've seen it, and look what it's done to me, Susan. Look what it's done. Your mother and father rot in a shallow grave somewhere, picked clean by animals. And now it's just you and me, Susan. And we're alone. The card is blank, but it doesn't have to be. Come and see what it holds." He rose it into the air, his bloody skeletal feet dangling feet above the ground. "Come and see." I pulled the pistol I always carry out of its holster and began firing at point-blank range into the demonic face and black heart of that thing. People began to scream all around me at the carnival. I turned to run out of the tent, but a cold hand gripped my shoulder. "Leaving so soon?" The soft voice whispered in my ear, laughing with the sound a drowning man might make. But we haven't finished, Susan. Worthy is the Lamb, worthy is the Lamb, worthy is the..." Suddenly, the hand touched the small silver cross my mother had given me as a small girl, and it flinched away. I felt the grip loosen and I ran without looking back. People had taken cover all over the carnival. Many had started to leave, and I saw agitated police and security trying to find out where the gunshots had come from. I immediately mixed into a large crowd and made my way towards the exit, but I constantly looked back, expecting to see a man with a melting face. Perhaps it would act like a police officer and pretend to arrest me before bringing me to some dark forest and starting the skinning process. I keep running now, but I always look over my shoulder because the faceless man doesn't age and he doesn't sleep, and he never, ever stops looking.
I'm sharing this because if I don't come back, well, the more people that know what happened, the better. Maybe then, someone will finally believe us. Every year since our college graduation, my best friend Liz and I would go on vacation together and visit a new city. As we were planning the trip for late summer 2021, she got an email saying she'd earned a free week-long stay at a hotel. She tends to travel a lot for business, so it's not unusual for her to get a free night every now and then. One of the locations she could redeem it at was somewhere we hadn't been before, and it looked ritzy. It sounded perfect. As soon as we walked into the lobby though, something felt off. I don't know how to explain it, other than it had weird vibes. It looked like an old building that had been recently renovated, but the bright colors, lights, paintings, it felt like someone just slapped a thin, cheery veneer over decades worth of caked-on misery. The air just felt heavy. Liz didn't seem to notice it. At least, not at first. The guy at the check-in desk stared at us for a while, before muttering that he needed to talk to his manager. We were a bit worried that we were about to hear that the email she received had been a scam. But to our relief, he came back with a grin and said they'd upgraded our room. The city skyline and faint mountains in the distance that we could see from our window won me over. That first day was fine, but when I woke up the next morning, Liz was sitting motionless on her bed, her back to me. Liz? I repeated her name several times, before finally walking over to tap her on the shoulder. Hey. She finally turned to me, spoke quietly, as if someone else might be listening. Did you hear it last night? I shook my head. Oh. She looked embarrassed for a moment, like she was unsure if she should continue. I couldn't sleep. Not with the scratching behind the wall, she whispered eventually. I don't like it. I'm a heavy sleeper. A bit too heavy, honestly. At home where it's just me, I have to set multiple alarms to make sure I wake up on time for work. And I've literally slept through a fire alarm once. Luckily, it was a false alarm. Liz was the opposite. Every little noise would wake her, so she always tended to have a rough first night or two as she became accustomed to the new sounds of a place. I thought maybe after a couple of nights she'd get used to it, or chalk it up to the building settling, especially in such an old place. I offered to ask for a different room, but she was worried they'd charge us. She said just try and ignore it. The day before we were supposed to check out though, she shook me awake. Her eyes were wide and frantic as she stood over me. She'd moved her nightstand aside and was pointing at a small door, 3 or so feet tall, that had been behind it. The door was old looking, dark wood with an antique knob, and stood in contrast to everything else in the bright and modern-looking room. "Did you open it?" She looked at me like I was out of my mind for even asking her, and backed away as I approached it. For good measure, I figured that once we looked, we'd both feel better. I was wrong. As I carefully pushed it open, the smell of rust and bleach hit me immediately. The narrow space was long. It went further back than my phone light could reach from where I stood. After a few feet, it faded into blackness, since it was only as tall and wide as the small door. I realized I'd have to crawl on my hands and knees to see how far back it went. I hate being in the dark, and I can't stand small spaces. But when I looked over my shoulder at Liz and saw the bags under her eyes, the expression on her face, I figured I owed it to her at the least to take a look. So, I crawled in. Once I was a few feet inside, I saw that the small and narrow space ended at another wall, one plastered in yellowing wallpaper. It looked so old. I guessed it was probably a part of the original hotel. The dark patterned carpet was dotted with stains, which seemed to be contributing to at least part of the strong smell. As I backed out, I thought I heard a faint whisper coming from behind the old wallpaper in front of me. As soon as I was all the way out, I had to fight the urge to slam the door shut and run. It felt so wrong in there. I wasn't sure what the purpose of that space had once been, but even then, I knew it was nothing good. "Hey," I whispered as soon as the door was closed. I tried to nonchalantly move the end table back in front of it. "Why don't we pack up? We'll find a different hotel for tonight." She seemed a bit calmer, said she could hang in there for the final night. After being in that small space behind our wall, the thought of sleeping there another night honestly freaked me the hell out. But I figured that if she could make it through the last night, then so could I. After we turned out the lights that night, I remember seeing her dark silhouette sitting on the edge of her bed, motionless, until I fell asleep. That was the last time I ever saw her. When I woke up, it was almost noon. Both of our alarms were blaring. We were supposed to check out hours earlier. My confusion quickly turned to panic when I realized Liz wasn't in the room. Her suitcase, purse, phone, everything was still there. The main door was locked and chained from the inside too. At first, I couldn't think of where else she could be, until it hit me. There was one place I hadn't checked. The nightstand was still in front of the door, but I was fairly certain it was in a slightly different spot than we had left it in the day before. Reluctantly, I slid it aside. "Liz?" No answer. She wasn't there. I did see, though, what I thought had been a wall was open slightly. I pushed it tentatively and took a sharp breath when I saw it led into a tunnel. It went so far back, far beyond the reach of the beam of the light of my phone. It looked endless. "Liz? Liz?" I got no response, other than my own voice echoing back through the narrow space. I tried to tell myself that it would be okay. I had to go in, especially if Liz had gone in there too. I took a deep breath, nudged the false wall open all the way, and I entered. As I crawled on my hands and knees with my phone ungracefully held between my teeth, I tried not to think about the tight space in the pitch blackness, as far as I could see in front of me, or picture what Liz would have been doing down there. I tried not to focus on the streaks of nearly dried blood along the floor. I had to keep going. I knew that Liz would do the same for me. I realized that I wasn't even sure how long she had been gone for. I promised myself the walls were not shrinking around me. It was my imagination, that this dark expanse couldn't go on forever. Eventually, the tight darkness would end. I kept repeating it to myself over and over as a mantra, just to keep myself going, to try and distract myself from the feeling of despair that seemed to fill the place. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel ended, opening into a room without lights or windows, but it was at least large enough that I could stand and stretch out my cramped muscles. All I could make out was wall-to-wall dark, crumbling bricks, and a weak-looking set of stairs that led above and below. It was so quiet there, so eerie. It was easy to forget that I was in a city packed with people, still inside a bustling hotel. When I shined my light upwards into the pitch blackness above my head, I could see the stairs leading to other platforms like the one I was standing on. It looked like the rooms above and below ours had similar tunnels. The smell of bleach had long since been replaced by the scent of mildew and old things. It felt so wrong back there in a way that I couldn't put my finger on, that I couldn't help but shiver when wondering why it had been designed that way, what it had been used for. I assumed the stairs to the tunnels above me all led to other rooms, so I went down, the protesting metal echoing into the huge empty space above my head. I finally reached a heavy door, and after being in the dark for so long, the bright sunlight hurt my eyes when I opened it. I was looking into a back alley outside, around the corner from where the hotel seemed to end. The door was covered with the same bricks as the rest of the building. It was so discreet that when I closed it behind me, it blended in perfectly with the outside wall. I remember running back inside and bracing myself against the counter, while I tried to convey what I found to anyone that would listen. I still have the image in my mind of how the dried blood on my palm stood out starkly on the white marble. It was all I could focus on as the manager tried to calm me down. He said Liz probably just wandered off. People go off on their own all the time to explore the city, he told me. She'd likely come back later. She never did. I was the one that called the police, and the officer that came out chatted casually with the hotel manager for a long time. They checked the room. I showed him the door, but he didn't seem concerned. He just repeated what the manager said. Maybe she decided to start over and didn't want to be found. I was hysterical. Pointed out that her purse and her phone were still in the room. She hadn't even taken her shoes. It's not uncommon, he told me, leaning in a little too close. A warning less subtle than his words was written across his face. For people to visit a city like this and never leave. I drove around for hours, asking shop owners and people outside if they'd seen her. None of them had. Eventually, I had to go home, back to work. The official story is that she just left, of her own volition. I don't believe it. Neither does her family or fiancé. Every so often, he and I would drive up there, just on the off chance that anyone had seen her. But we'd always get the same answer. He's the one that had the idea to book the same room again, to see what we could find in the tunnels. He must have called dozens of times. He tried to make a reservation, ask if room 347 or any of the ones directly above it are available, and they'd always tell him no. We hadn't lost all hope, but we'd certainly lost most of it. Until a few days ago. I recently received an email invite letting me know I'd earned a free week, just like the one Liz received 2 years ago. I went to check in, and after looking me over, the guy manning the desk said he needed to get his manager. The manager, the same one as before, came out in person, and I was so worried he'd turn me away, but he simply smiled and informed me that my room had been upgraded. I'm sure you can guess my room number. I've been trying to stay awake each night, although after everything that happened, I wouldn't be able to fall asleep here even if I wanted to. Every night, I've just been sitting in the dark, listening to the sounds coming from behind that awful door. Sounds that I can almost swear are a bit louder, a bit closer. Each night, I'm supposed to check out tomorrow morning. I have a feeling that tonight, I'll finally find out what happened to Liz. Wish me luck. I can't believe that a few weeks have passed already. I'm sorry it took so long to get an update posted. Everything that happened has been a lot to process. At first, I didn't want to even write it down. I didn't want to relive that night, but I guess I can't avoid it forever. Almost exactly 2 years to the day from my first post, my best friend Liz disappeared from room 347 in the middle of the final night of our stay. I woke up the next morning to the door still being bolted from the inside. She had left everything behind. The only place she could have gone was through the dark, narrow space behind the small door and false wall leading from our room. Even after crawling through it myself, I never found her. The hotel manager and police were not just insistent that she left of her own volition, but were almost threatening when I pushed it further. Her fiancé Jared and I had been searching for her ever since. When I finally got the chance to stay in that room again, hoping for even a slim chance of finding out what happened to her, I took it. So, I bought a little can of triple action pepper spray, packed a bag, and scheduled an email to go out to Jared the morning after the final night of my stay. You know, just in case I never came back. I've been home for a few weeks, and even now, I'm still struggling and trying to put some of the pieces together. I'm starting to accept that there are some things I may never fully understand. During my recent stay, I didn't spend much time in the room, with its overpowering smell of bleach mingled with something else that I couldn't quite place. Mostly, I tried to search the surrounding city for anything I may have missed before, and of course, explored every part of that hotel that I could. Details I didn't catch during our first stay, or pay enough attention to before my final night a few weeks ago, are now haunting me. Details such as how a ritzy-looking hotel in the middle of a popular tourist destination never seemed to have anyone else in it, or how there was no way to get to the 7th floor. The button so casually skipped from 6 to 8 on the lone elevator, and from the main stairs what should have been the entrance was just a solid wall. As I traversed the winding hallways, I realized that on every floor that I could access, other than my own, the new carpet and cheery paint stopped abruptly after a certain point. As I ventured deeper into the hotel, I found myself surrounded by the original fading wallpaper, stains marring the swirling patterns of the torn carpets. Even the light fixtures along the walls looked dated. Most struggled to stay on at all, often throwing the windowless halls into near darkness without warning. Whenever I crossed over to the old unrenovated side, I always had a strange sense of discomfort, the kind you get when there's no one else around you, but you can tell that you are almost certainly not alone. Traveling down those halls felt like stepping back in time, but to a time that was clearly better left forgotten. Initially, I thought maybe that was their way of saving money, neglecting the portions that most guests wouldn't venture to. One night, I was wandering around one of those eerie quiet floors, further in than I had ever gone before, and was drawn to a bit of brick peeking out under cracked plaster and peeling wallpaper in the distance. It was almost entirely bathed in shadows, just beyond where the struggling hall lights had finally given up, and seemed older than everything else around it. There was a thin gap in the mortar, and while it was so dark that I couldn't see anything, I could feel a faint stale breeze that carried with it an overpowering smell of rotting meat. Gagging, I turned around abruptly to see the hotel manager, just a couple of feet behind me, his eyes glinting at me, unnatural looking in the low light. I pushed past him without incident, but I couldn't help but wonder if there had been other times he'd silently followed me down the dimly lit hallways without me noticing. After that, I made more of an effort to avoid him and his predatory smile. Every floor I could access had a similar makeshift wall in the same place. I eventually realized it was once a second elevator shaft, since bricked in and plastered over. Once, in the near silence, I thought I heard the sound of something moving behind it. It's probably easier to seal it off than fix it, I told myself at the time. I preferred that explanation, rather than to acknowledge my distinct feeling that there was something, not someone, something, back there that I had no desire to meet. Eventually, I reached the final night of my stay. No closer to finding out what happened to her. The only thing I could think to do was to try and recreate what I believed may have happened to her that night. As I prepared for bed, I shoved my phone in my pajama pocket and grabbed a little can of pepper spray. My grand plan at that point was to pretend to be asleep and see if anyone came for me that night. If they did, I'd hit them with the pepper spray and try to get a photo of them. It may not have been the best idea, but I knew it would be the last chance I'd ever get to find out what happened to her. After glancing nervously at my small can of pepper spray, I grabbed the Swiss Army knife off my keychain and shoved it into my other pocket for good measure. I began to wonder, as I stared up at the ceiling that night, in the exact same room she disappeared from 2 years earlier, if they invited me there specifically for nothing to happen. I'd been telling anyone that would listen for years all about Liz's disappearance, about the narrow dark space in our room I'd crawled through. Jared had been doing the same, like I had said it in my last post. He'd been trying to book that same room for years with no luck. What better way to further discount our concerns than for me to have a perfectly normal stay? Of course, nothing would happen, I realized, disappointed, although with the tiniest bit of gut-tinged relief mixed in. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of furniture moving across the carpet. All the confidence and determination I'd felt in the daylight was gone in an instant. Never was I more aware that I was just one person alone in that awful place, armed with a phone, less than an ounce of pepper spray, and a tiny keychain knife. As in that moment, where I wondered if someone would try and pull me out of the bed and drag me into the dark. Maybe it would be easy enough to make me disappear inconspicuously. After all, they had my credit card information. What was stopping them from using it a few towns over and throwing all my luggage in some ditch? As I heard the old hinges of the small door protest, a flurry of jumbled thoughts went through my head. As I clutched my little canister to my chest, I had always assumed Liz to be alive and that someone took her out of the room and into the tunnel. But what if she hadn't been? What if they killed her? And they did it right here. There had been blood in the small crawl space. Enough had soaked into the carpet that it was still wet by the time I went looking for her. I was in the room with her physically that night, but I'm such a heavy sleeper that she may as well have been alone. Another sharp pang of guilt crept in to mingle with the terror. After a moment, I heard what sounded like raspy, strained breaths, the sound filling the otherwise silent room. It grew louder as whoever, whatever it was, emerged and began to head towards me. And then, only a few feet away, they stopped. I was so worried that if they knew I was awake, they'd leave before I could find out what happened. I tried to keep my eyes squeezed shut and hope that they'd just get a bit closer to make sure they'd be in range of the spray, since I'd probably only have one chance at this. The waiting in those long moments, though, as I wondered who or what was in the room with me, I finally couldn't take it. My eyes shot open. I don't know what I thought I'd see looming over me in the darkness. A stranger? A monster? But I know who I did not expect to see. Liz. She was barefoot, illuminated in the faint moonlight shining through the open sliver between the curtains. It was dark, her face mostly obscured in the shadows, and contorted slightly as if with a strange little smile, but I could tell it was her. I could feel it. I gasped, and she seemed almost as startled as I was, because she took off running. I had barely stumbled out of bed by the time she had already ducked through the door, past the false wall, and was crawling through the dark passageway, faster than seemed humanly possible. I hissed her name, trying to get her to stop, but she just kept going. It did feel wrong to me, even then as I followed her. If she'd truly been okay all this time, why hadn't she left and contacted her fiancé, or family or friends? Why was she crawling around in the darkness behind the walls of this awful place, alone? But at the time, the only meaningful thought I could really focus on, overpowering in its insistence, was how I couldn't lose her again. While I was fumbling for my phone, I realized that Liz didn't have any source of light with her. She'd entered the tunnel the same way she'd left through it those years ago, in the pitch blackness. As I followed her, I realized what the smell had been in my room. That, mixed with the bleach, had been almost too faint to detect. But there in that tight space, just feet behind her, I recognized it. Earthiness. Death. I knew something was wrong, but we're so close to the exit, and I was too focused on getting her out of there, walking out of that door and never coming back. Not for my purse, my shoes, anything, because I had a very strong suspicion that if I did, we would never leave that hotel again. As we reached the end and stepped out of the cramped space and into the familiar back room, I nearly cried in relief. We were only 2 flights of stairs above the exit. We were actually going to make it out, both of us. But she didn't go down. She started to go up. Liz! Liz! I pleaded for her to come back, told her I knew where the exit was, but she continued on as if she hadn't heard me. I pulled at her in desperation. She shook me off with strength I didn't know she possessed. Realizing she wasn't going to stop, I reluctantly followed, thinking she must have known something I didn't, a better way out. It was the only thing that made sense to me. She'd slowed her pace to allow me to catch up. She was no longer fleeing. She was leading. I'd been occasionally pausing to shine my flashlight down below us, deep-seated fear growing as the exit became further and further away, and was eventually swallowed up by the darkness entirely. After what felt to my tired legs like a lifetime, she stopped and began to enter another crawl space, heading back, deeper into the hotel. I froze. The already intense sense of wrongness overwhelmed me at the thought of going in. She turned back to smile at me briefly from the darkness, and I realized then that everything was going to be okay. I had found her. I knew that following her was the right thing to do. The new feeling of calm, it overrode my deeply seated fear of seeing what was on the other side of the tunnel. So, I took a deep breath, and I found out what was on the 7th floor. I instantly felt much safer than I had anywhere else in that godforsaken place. As we stepped into the immaculate room that the tight tunnel opened into, this was a good place. Safe. I was suddenly very confident that we were going the right way. I followed her out of the room and down an immaculate hallway to a huge ballroom. Art Deco details, the chandelier. It was beautiful. That much was obvious, even in the dark. I felt an odd sense of excitement at the thought of approaching it, nearly giddy at the sight of the elegant golden elevator at the end. The exit. Finally. I froze for a moment when I heard a door slam shut somewhere behind me, but no matter how hard I tried to hold on to that concern, the intense feeling of alarm, I couldn't. It was quickly gone, beyond my reach. Everything was fine. She stepped into the elevator and smiled at me over her shoulder. I knew that was where I needed to be. I was ready to leave. I was only a few feet behind her when I tripped and fell to the side. I felt around to see what I had tripped over. It was a single shoe, the canvas stiff with long dried blood. When I looked up from it in confusion, I realized that the entire room had changed. The air carried a hint of old things, mildew and despair. The chandelier hung at an odd angle, ruined, rendered dark and useless by decades of neglect. Glass from the shattered and now boarded up windows littered the ground. The wooden floor was warped and stained, and the dated wallpaper had mostly peeled away. A sense of longing and ruin and sadness radiated through the huge room. I shivered as my beam illuminated what I had fallen into. A group of disintegrated suitcases. Torn clothes and other discarded belongings formed messy piles, encircling what had minutes ago appeared to be an elevator. With a new sense of horrified clarity, I realized what I'd almost stepped into. The open shaft. The one that had been walled up on every other floor. The doors were long gone, leaving only a few feet of damaged flooring between me and the 7-story drop below. Maybe if I had been paying more attention, I would have noticed the sound sooner. The familiar, earthy rot smell on the stale air coming from within it. But I was focused on something snagged on the metal opening. I told myself it couldn't have been Liz's. It couldn't have been the Melvin shirt she had bought at the concert we went to years ago. The one she had worn to bed that night. It could have been anyone's. Because Liz was fine. She was here with me. I heard the sound of something sharp on metal. The awful ragged breaths she had been taking. I shined my flashlight up to see her slowly climbing up from the dark gaping pit of the shaft. Her perfectly round eyes reflected back at me, like an animal's, like a predator. Something that evolved in the darkness and could see far better in the lightless space than I could ever hope to. What I thought had been a smile, I realized then that it simply had more teeth than it could comfortably fit in its mouth. The more I stared, frozen, the more I realized how wrong the face, all the details were. I couldn't understand how I didn't see it before, how I could have mistaken that thing for my best friend since childhood. For a brief fleeting moment, I thought the not Liz was the most terrible thing I could ever see in my life, until I noticed more of them crawling up the shaft behind her. When I saw what they looked like when they weren't attempting to imitate a person, I was suddenly very aware of the door I had heard open and close behind me moments before. True fear, I've since learned, is seeing something you can barely comprehend, much less hope to outrun, standing between you and the only exit. I realized I was just holding my phone. I'd lost my pepper spray at some point, so I did the first thing I could think of. I shined my phone's flashlight towards it, hoping that something so pale, that saw so well in the dark, that it wouldn't be able to handle the bright light. All I managed to do was get a clearer view of the two long limbs, and those awful eyes as it continued towards me, unfazed. I fished my tiny knife out of my pocket and ran towards it. I didn't have any other plan. I just knew that I didn't want to die down there in the dark. With that haze I'd been trapped in earlier lifted, I became aware that the entire floor smelled like death. Unlike the room downstairs, no one had felt the need to try and mask it with a splash of bleach. Some doors had long since fallen off their hinges and formed additional obstacles as they lay splintered. I tried dodging around the thing in the hall, but it managed to grab me, leaving a deep gash in my leg as it tried to pull me to the ground. I stabbed at it until it let go. All the blood, not sure whether it was its or mine, allowed me to slip through its grasp. At the end of the hall was the room we'd entered through. 747 crudely painted on the door. This time around, I realized it was filled with the remains of decaying furniture, along with other things I'd rather forget. I was actually relieved to shove myself back into the tight, lightless passageway, but not as much as I was when I stepped out of it. I was only 2 flights away from the exit when I heard a chorus of wheezing breaths above me. I made the mistake of looking up, saw so many eyes trained on mine. There was another familiar face among them, wearing his usual predator's grin. I moved as fast as my tired, bleeding legs could carry me. Hearing them quickly close the distance between us was an excellent motivator. I was only a few feet ahead of them by the time I stumbled out of the back exit, and I didn't stop running, unsure if they would follow me outside. Finally, I turned back to see there was nothing there. I still didn't feel safe until I called Jared, and I was in the car with them and almost home. I refused to go to the hospital in that town. I don't trust anyone. I was so afraid that they'd put me under, take me back to that hotel, and I'd wake up on the 7th floor again. Or maybe I wouldn't wake up at all. So, yes, I did make it home, but I wish I had a happier update to give. I still wonder who Liz must have seen in our room that night, who she would have followed so blindly. I try not to think about what must have happened afterwards. It's too painful. I haven't been able to sleep much since I've been home. All I see whenever I close my eyes are those things staring at me from down the dark hallway on the 7th floor. There's something else that's been keeping me awake too. I had originally booked my reservation with a fake address, but in addition to everything else, I left my purse and ID behind when I fled the room. It's been a few weeks now, but I still can't help but wonder if soon I'll see those perfectly round eyes glinting at me from within the darkness of my own home. Back when I grew up in rural Minnesota, my mother wanted me to keep in touch with my Scandinavian roots. We haven't lived in the Nordic countries for 3 generations, but there are still a couple of things that stick around, behavioral quirks mostly, and a couple of traditions that have been with our family for as long as anyone can remember. Putting porridge out for the forest gnomes was one thing. Mom used to trick me with these dolls that she'd put in the snow and point to, saying, "Don't move too fast, you'll scare them. And let's not talk about dancing around the maypole. That stuff's just embarrassing." But the most peculiar tradition is the one about A Midsummer Night's Dream. I know, that's a Shakespeare title, but it's also a traditional Scandinavian thing. It goes a little something like this. On the evening of midsummer, you are to collect several kinds of wildflowers. Then you bundle them up and put them under your pillow. If you do, you are supposed to dream of your one true love. Now, I have 3 sisters. They were all about romance and predestination, and I couldn't have cared less if I wanted to. But every year, they'd walk hand in hand, collecting wildflowers and putting them under their pillows. And I was too young to wander off on my own. I had to stick around. That is, until they decided it was my turn. It was my oldest sister who made the call. She was 12 and I'd just turned 7, but she figured the earlier, the better. "You have to tell us what she looks like," she said. "Like, if she's tall or thin or even fat." "I bet she's fat," said my second oldest sister. "Statistically, she's Chinese or Indian," said the other. "That's where there are most girls." I tried to ignore them, but their cackling got on my nerves. They gathered up some silky aster, blue-eyed grass, silverleaf, wild bergamot, blue sunflowers, and ground plum, but couldn't get the 7th one. They looked around but couldn't find one. I just wanted to go home, so I picked up the first thing I saw, sticking out next to a rusted-out barrel. "How about this one?" I said. holding up a yellow sunflower with a black spot. "That's a black-eyed Susan," said my oldest sister. "You're gonna marry a Susan," grinned the other. "Little Susie gonna love you," sang the last. I rolled my eyes so hard that they almost popped out of my head as they cackled and teased. Putting my hair up in a bow, they bundled up the wildflowers and made me sleep with them under my pillow. I didn't notice anything strange at first. Just a night like any other. You have such vivid dreams when you're a kid. Like everything just happens faster. You even sleep faster. But this was something else entirely. It wasn't just a dream. It was an experience. And the worst part is, I didn't even remember it. I just remembered it was bad. Really, really bad. It was so bad that I completely blocked it out. I don't even remember waking up. I just remember laying in the bathtub submerged in cold water. I looked up at my 3 sisters. They looked terrified. My throat was hoarse, and I was wide awake, but I couldn't even remember going to bed. "Does it hurt?" my oldest asked. Her voice was different, lower, careful. I shook my head. "No," I said. "I'm okay." "It sounded like it hurt," she continued. "Like it really hurt. I think it was a bad dream." "Was it her?" asked my youngest sister. "Did you dream of her?" I couldn't tell. It was just a dark space in the back of my mind that made my pulse shiver when I thought about it. And yet, I knew the answer. "Yeah," I said. "It was Black-Eyed Susan. Now, I've been teased by my sister my whole life, but they never teased me about Black-Eyed Susan. They'd never seen me like that. I'd woken up screaming at the top of my lungs, rolling around on the floor. They thought I was having a seizure. They took me to the bathroom while my mom called an ambulance. We didn't talk much about it. They never had me checked for epilepsy, and I was perfectly healthy otherwise. They talked about it being some kind of allergic reaction, but I'd never seen a reaction like that. Over time, we came to this unspoken conclusion that those wildflowers gave me the worst nightmare of my life. And in that nightmare, I saw my one true love, Black-Eyed Susan. I wouldn't think much about that night over the years to come. It became this distant memory, like your first cold. But every now and then, particularly around midsummer, I would try to remember what that dream had been like, and something inside me would sink into this bottomless hole in my chest. It teased me. I could concentrate, and I'd see it, but I didn't want to. To have forgotten was a blessing, and I knew better than to challenge it. But it's a weird headspace to live in, to have a concept such as true love and marriage, so closely associated with trauma. Especially since all the other couples in my life were perfectly fine role models. My mother and father were an extraordinary couple, and while my sisters had some dating life drama, nothing bad ever really happened to them. So as I got into my teenage years, I didn't want to chase girls and flirt. I didn't want to fall in love. I joked about it a lot, but the feeling of meeting my one true love felt like throwing my soul down an endless pit. I tried to rationalize it away. It was just a stupid phase, a quirk. It became like a fun party story to tell in my late teens. It was funny in a way, saying I used to believe in such things. But there was an asterisk stuck to that story every time I told it. A little white lie. I never stopped believing in it. It started to really bother me when I was about 17. At that point, I'd been in short relationships, and I'd been in love. But I couldn't stop thinking that it wasn't real, that true love was out there, and that it was terrifying, something that would make my heart sink into my stomach. So I decided to just bite the bullet and try the whole thing again, to face my fears. So that midsummer, I put together 7 types of wildflowers again, ending with a Black Susan. As kids, We're very good at handling pain, or at least we're resilient. We have time to heal. But when you're 17, it hits differently. When I went to bed that night, I had cold sweats, and I couldn't stop thinking about what was waiting behind my closed eyes. Would there be a reaction at all? Or had I wasted all this time being anxious about nothing? I closed my eyes and tried not to think about it. I counted down from 100, then 200. I twisted and turned, trying to get the sweaty covers to stop sticking to my skin. At the slightest stretch, my eyes would pop open. I'd get this ache in my face from trying to keep them closed. But after hours, something clicked. My muscles relaxed, and I caught a whiff of the wildflowers from under my pillow, and something inside me screamed at me to turn back, to open my eyes, but it was too late. It felt like looking at the bottom of a pool, but straight ahead. A relative shimmer, ethereal but physical at the same time, like a night sky that you can push your hands through. I fumbled with my hands, trying to find something to hold on to. There was this swirl in the back of my head, like having a large drink on an empty stomach. Something reached for me and touched my fingertips. Something as hard as fingernails. It poked and prodded me from different angles. A strange voice seeped through, neutral, genderless, and with an unusual pronunciation. "Where have you been?" it asked. I tried to regain my footing, but there was nothing to hold on to. Just these protrusions from the dark. Finally, I felt myself slowing down. A steadiness, control. Something came out of the dark, eyes so black that their head looked hollow against the night. A vaguely human skull connected to an infinite mass, like a broken flower growing out of cracked concrete. Muscle and vein contracting and compounding at every angle. Ripples of flesh with every offset heartbeat. It's been so long. Something wrapped around my ankle, tightening. "Come home." My eyes snapped open, but I wasn't awake. I could feel her wrapped around my ankle. I pulled away the covers and watched my foot turn blue. It was bending, and I felt nothing. Then the bone snapped. I've never experienced something like that. I've never broken a bone. And experiencing a trimallear fracture in the comfort of your own bed is inhuman. It hurts so bad you lose bladder control, and I couldn't do anything but fall out of bed and writhe on the floor. But the pain wouldn't go away. I just screamed. I tried to reach for my phone, but it's like it refused to let me reach it. A neighbor heard me. Help came. It wouldn't take long for the leg to heal, but bones mend all the time. But true love doesn't. I pushed the thought of love and marriage out of my life for over a decade. I would shy away from coy smiles and flowery laughter. Some people thought I had a problem with my sexuality. Others thought I was under some kind of religious repression. I tried to explain that relationships just weren't my thing, but it's hard to explain it without a reason. If I was really pressed about it, I'd say it was childhood trauma. That usually stopped the questions. I'd do this for years, a string of short-term relationships where I kept hoping and praying I wouldn't fall in love. Anything to keep me away from that dark place. I couldn't tell what was going to happen if I met someone who'd make me feel things, real things. But life isn't so simple. It would take me years, but when I turned 31, I met her. Lilia hit me like a summer's breeze the first time I talked to her. It was a birthday party, and she was invited by a mutual friend of ours. Lilia had been working overtime and forgotten all about the party, so she joined in at the last minute. She showed up in an oversized hoodie and yesterday's jeans, spending most of the night at the snack table looking at her phone. Her enthusiasm started and stopped at bobbing her head to the music. When I saw that we were out of pretzels and I went up to talk to her. "Looking for snacks?" I asked. "Your mom's a snack." She snapped back. "All right, Yeah, but I was talking about the pretzels. She looked at me like I'd struck gold. She'd been so hell-bent on the idea that I was coming up to hit on her that it never crossed her mind that she'd eaten a whole bowl of salty pretzels. She snort-laughed, apologized, and I felt my heart skip a beat. I knew it was trouble. I liked her. Lilia was a work-from-home back-end developer. She spent most of her days trying to steer her team through rough deadlines and absurd last-minute changes. She explained it as trying to teach cats algebra while falling out of an airplane. She cycled through periods of insane stress to weeks of coasting, which she'd made into an absurd routine. Clearly something she couldn't keep up forever. We didn't start dating right away. We chatted a bit and found out we had a lot in common. She'd been dating this one guy since she was 14 years old, and had only recently turned single, so she wasn't eager to get back on the market. She didn't mind the vague trauma. She just liked being around me. I think our friends realized we were dating long before Lilia or I did. We just spent time together until one day when we didn't want it to stop. Still, I couldn't help but think of Black-Eyed Susan. No matter how soothing Lilia's snores were, I could still lay awake at night. There was a warmth in my chest as I imagined the smell of wildflowers from my pillow, an ache in my leg where I could touch the scars. If I were truly to fall in love, what would happen? Those nights came more often, from once every 6 months or so to every week. After having dated for about a year, Lilia was eager to help me get over the whole thing. She knew it was trauma, and she knew I didn't want to talk about it, but she couldn't let it go. And of course she couldn't. She was in a loving relationship with a man who couldn't say he loved her, and all she knew was that something had happened. It got to the point where it was driving a wedge between us. She wanted to help, and I wanted her to understand, and I could only think of one way to show her. I had to do it again. On midsummer, we went outside to pick wildflowers. Lilia was excited, but her smile faded when she felt how serious I was. I did what I'd done every other time. I picked 6 types, and a final flower would pop up out of nowhere. And of course, it'd be the Black-Eyed Susan. I bundled them all up. I could feel a phantom pain cutting into my leg, which gave me a limp. "So what are these for?" she asked. "For sleep," I said, "and I'm gonna need your help." "Sure, yeah, whatever you need. If it looks bad, I need you to wake me up." "How do I know if it's bad?" I shook my head and took her by the hand. "You'll know." I did some preparations. I had gauze and painkillers. Lilia was prepared to call for help if necessary. She still had no idea what was going on, but I could tell she was nervous. Then again, so was I. The problem was, I couldn't sleep. I just lay there, and she watched me. After about an hour, she crawled up next to me. She knew it was something that happened when I slept, but she wanted to calm me down. "I need you to see this," I said. "It's okay," she whispered. "Go to sleep. Promise you'll keep watch." "I promise." I didn't turn my head to look. I trusted her. So I closed my eyes, let my breathing slow, and felt my head fill with the smell of wildflowers. It was like waking up again, a mild tingle covering my body, like being draped in spider webs. I blinked and blinked, but it was all black. A long, drawn-out breath echoed like a field of sighing flowers. Beautiful. A growth coming out of the dark, translucent, like living glass hardening into soft marble. A woman, dragging her legs through the night like she was trudging through a swamp. She grabbed me by the hand, pulling me along. It felt like I was carried through a current. I could see the bedroom from above. I lay there, and Lilia was sitting next to me. I can't really explain what it felt like. Sort of like watching your reflection blink. I could see her struggling to stay awake, nodding off and on. She was trying so hard. Is that what beautiful looks like? Black-eyed Susan asked. I don't even know what you are, I said. Of course you do, she said. I am your one true love. The words slithered, a drawn-out S poised in the air. I tried not to look at her. It was like the opposite of staring into a sun. The light in your eyes began to die, and you can feel yourself growing colder, slower. You can't be, I said. It's impossible. But I am, she said. You love me. She turned her attention to the room hovering in front of us. I could see little tendrils creep under the furniture, reaching for Lilia and me. Long finger-like limbs and layered scales, bending at painful angles. One pulled down her phone. Another moved a chair. Two of them struggled to move the bed. What are you doing? I asked. Passing time. One of the tendrils closed around my stomach. There was pressure, like someone tightening a belt. It cut into my hips. Before the pain, I could feel a slight pop. If you love me, why are you hurting me? I asked. How else are you going to get used to it? She asked back. Get used to what? She turned to me, breath reeking of ammonia with every spit of a word. Us. A hand closed around my neck. My eyes flung open. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't feel my legs. I flailed with my arm, reaching for Lilia. She got out of bed, only to find that her phone was gone. What's wrong? She asked. What's happening? She had to cover her mouth when she saw my neck. She grabbed my arm, but the moment she did, something took hold of her. In the corner of my eye, I saw her getting pulled into the other room, clawing at the carpet with a terrified shriek. My left arm rose out of the bed, as if carried by an unseen string. Two of my fingers popped out of their sockets, like a painful countdown. I couldn't scream. I could barely think. No oxygen. Lilia came running back and grabbed me. She pulled on my arm, and something let go. I fell out of bed, gasping for air as she cradled my head in her arms. I could see the color returning to my hands as two fingers turned purple. I didn't feel a thing, but I would in a couple of seconds. Hold on, Lilia said. Her phone was gone. She bandaged my fingers and tried to keep them straight. I'm sorry, I gasped. I'm so sorry. She just shook her head, trying to process what had happened. There were no words. We just stayed there on the floor. But I could see something in the corners of the room, little quirks and shades. Something was waiting for me to let my guard down. What's hurting you? She asked. Was it? Something broke in me as I swallowed my words. But Lilia deserved the truth. I think she loves me. Over the coming weeks, I tried my best to explain. Lilia was terrified. She'd never seen anything like it, and there was no explanation that could settle her nerves. It's one thing to know someone you care about has trauma, but it's another thing entirely to experience something impossible. That can make or break you. But Lilia didn't break. She started asking questions. Why was I targeted? What was this thing? What did it want? But things were getting strange. It's as if thinking about Black Susan had brought her closer to us, in a physical, literal way. Like we were building towards something. I would spot movement in the shadows. I'd notice furniture out of place and hear creaking doors in the middle of the night. And of course, it had to be her. She was playing with me. Lilia would stay up at night, reading about various Scandinavian traditions. The cast iron scissors under my pillow, the midsummer pole, the year walk, trolls, elves, dwarves, and gnomes. She gave me lists of things to ask my parents about, to see if our family had been targeted by something ancient or evil. But weeks would come and go, and we wouldn't be anywhere close to an answer. and the shadows would grow longer. Things would disappear, and every night, when I closed my eyes, I'd catch a whiff of earthy wildflowers. Things would quickly progress beyond tricks and shadows. At one point, I was tripped while walking down a flight of stairs. Another time, something pressed down on the gas pedal, sending me straight through a red light. It's a miracle no one was hurt. Lilia wouldn't go unscathed. Electronics would break or go missing. Odd sounds would wake her up at night. She told me that sometimes she'd see a silhouette outside the window, as if someone was trying to catch a peek of us. Every time she looked closer, it would turn out to be fallen leaves or a peculiar branch. It was stressful, but there wasn't really an option. What else could we do but stick together and love one another? I don't remember the moment we moved in together. It just made sense. Since we spent all our time together anyway, she just moved more and more of her stuff in, and all of a sudden, her place was pretty much empty. So yeah, we lived together. It wasn't really a conscious decision. Lilia had a couple rough ideas of what that thing might be. She had a binder with ideas ranging from Arthurian mythology to jinn, and some kind of Polish bird demon. None of them fit it perfectly though, and frankly, it was such an odd thing for it all to be tied to this one ancient tradition. How could this thing be my true love? What was I missing? We figured it had to be something connected to that very first night, back when I was a kid, when they had put me in the bathtub to wake me up. For a full year, all we did was try and make it to the next day. It affected pretty much every aspect of our lives. The way we slept at night, the way we cooked, the way we did our laundry. There'd always be something messing up the rhythm of the day. It exhausted us, not just mentally and physically, but socially. We stopped going out. Hell, we barely even talked. Instead, we kept our heads down and tried not to think about it too much, silently hoping for the problem to solve itself as Lilia's binder gathered dust. But once the next midsummer came around, there was a difficult decision to be had. We can't live like this. She'd sat me down at the kitchen table. The light bulb had burned out somehow, despite only being 2 weeks old. "I'm sorry," I said. "I wouldn't blame you if..." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "You know that. So what do we do?" She looked around. The kitchen faucet was leaking again. "I suppose we ought to try something," she said. "You got any suggestions?" "She could kill us," I said. "We can't go there." "Maybe we don't have a choice." I just sat there in the dark, counting the seconds. She was right, of course, but that didn't mean I had to like it. As midsummer came, we decided we would do this together. We got a single large pillow and gathered the flowers together. We didn't say a word. We just walked among the wildflowers as a low rumble lingered on the horizon, a damp taste in the air as the storm brewed. But to me, all I could see was the woman I loved, and how she carefully brushed her hands against the tall grass. Even now, she could find something to appreciate. Tradition, ritual, and myth be damned. At that moment, there wasn't a force in the world that can convince me that she was anything but my actual true love. We rounded out our wildflowers with the black-eyed Susan. It was hidden next to a rusted-out barrel, as if trying its best to hide. But like every other year I'd done this, I'd find one. And with all 7 wildflowers in hand, we bundled them up and wandered home, hand in hand. We hugged each other tight as we went to bed. Some way, somehow, we would make it through the night. We had to. When I opened my eyes, something felt different. I thought I was standing in sand, but it was more like a fine concrete dust. The moon covered most of the night sky, but I couldn't see any stars. There were black trees in the distance, leafless and skeletonized by years of thirst. Along with the horizon was a single large tree, tall enough to almost reach the moon itself. An apocalyptic vision, if anything. "Who are you?" A melodic voice, kind but unsure. I turned around. "Lilia?" My first thought was that she looked taller, but that wasn't it. She was the same as always. It was me that had gotten shorter. My hands were smaller. I looked down at the 7-year-old version of myself, still dressed in my most comfortable childhood jammies. Lilia didn't really sound any different, but a child's ears hear things in other ways. She had the most beautiful voice. "It's me," I said. "Somehow." "You're really cute." She smiled. "But I don't get it." "I don't either. Maybe we're not supposed to." "Maybe." We wandered down a trail, hand in hand. There was no one around. No wind blowing through the dead plains. No birds in the sky. No chirping cicadas, and no rustling leaves. Just feet on dust. "There's no one here," I said. "This can't be it. Did we do it wrong?" she asked. "I don't think so. She's usually here by now." Lilia blinked, looking around. Then something dark settled over her eyes. "What if she is?" She let go of me and brushed her arms up and down in a self-hug, something she usually did when stressed. We wandered around for what felt like hours. Nothing happened. No one came to disturb us. It was just her, me, and nothingness. No black-eyed Susan, and nothing to tear us apart. "Does this mean you're my true love?" she asked. "I mean, I'm dreaming of you. That would make you mine too." I smiled. "I thought that was occupied." I thought so too, but there was no one there to challenge that claim. We just smiled at one another. That had to be it. Despite it all, something good had to come out of this. But no matter where we went, or for how long, nothing happened. We started to worry. We weren't waking up. We didn't get hungry or thirsty or tired. It was just this complete stage of emptiness. We would walk down forgotten paths for what felt like hours, strolling past sand-burnt concrete ruins. I don't know how much time passed. It might have been days. It might have been months. It was impossible to tell. And Lilia always had this amazing ability to make every moment pass by in a flash. She was impossible not to love. Even then, and even there, we'd make jokes and laugh. Though I couldn't get over the feeling of being stuck in my younger self. You don't realize how much you've changed until you step back into old shoes like that. Then I noticed something. A flicker of yellow. Right there, behind a rusted-out old barrel, was a black-eyed Susan. The same yellow flower I'd found on that fateful midsummer night as a kid. I don't know how I recognized it, but I did. It was the same flower. It had to be. I picked it up and showed it to Lilia. "Strange, huh?" I said. "Only one of these I've seen around." "I wonder what it does," she said. "You think it means?" Her voice cut out. The light warped in front of me, blurring like I was watching through a thin layer of rustling water. I could feel a tingle in my eyes. Lilia looked different, further away. "Don't go," she called out. "What are you doing?" "I'm not. I just picked this. I held it out and dropped it, giving her one last flower. We drifted apart. Something shifted. My head rolled back, and I felt this intense heat settling into my head. Then a coolness. Something trying to lower my temperature. Young voices, terrified. Lilia drifting further away, screaming at me to stay with her. Her voice goes from beautiful to desperate to something else. She would scream how much she loved me, and then scream at how much she hated me. I would leave her in that place for what would equate to eternities. For her to twist and turn in that place where she'd have nothing but her thoughts and regrets, where a starless sky would seep into her, whispering things to do, ways she would play whenever I returned, her head spinning with tales of Jinn and Mars and demons. It would just be seconds passing as I felt her disappear, but in those seconds, there would be eons, long enough for a body to forget what humans looked like, for a mind to forget what love is supposed to be, for a word or a phrase to change. True love. An ammonia-reeking scream reflected off of fractured space as she reached for me, trying to pull me back through the breaking light, a hand so warm that it burned my face. How could I be so cruel as to leave her for endless time to suffer? How could I be so selfish? Black-eyed Susan, Lilia, my one true love. My head burst through the water as I looked up at my 3 sisters. I was 7 years old and still in my jammies, submerged in the bathtub of my childhood home. And as healthy young minds do, my memories healed themselves, sealing away a trauma for me to uncover years down the line. Life would turn out the same way. Awkward teenage years, short relationships, and I would come back to that broken place in time again, and she would play her games, reminding me of the betrayal she felt, and I wouldn't understand. That is, until one night, when I woke up alone. We'd gone to bed together, but only one had made it back. I'd live a life twice, and I hadn't even realized it. I stumbled into the shower, set it to cold, and collapsed. I could just think of one thing to say. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Another view of the world from behind a shimmer, be it warm tears or running water. Today, I'm 47, never married, no serious dating. I go back to Lilia every year, hoping I can find something to remind me of what she used to be. I've tried bringing things along, something to bring her back with me. I've yet to find anything useful. It doesn't work like that. Sometimes I try to stay a little longer, but the pain is unbearable. I suspect one day she'll kill me, and if I don't come back, I suppose that's the only way this can end. I try not to think about it, but when I do, I try to convince myself that I will end up the same way as her. Maybe we can find solace in our madness. Maybe we'll live together in a paradise of dust and strange moons. I don't know. I don't think that old tradition just shows you true love. I think it will take you to a place where you can meet. But perhaps that place isn't what it used to be. Maybe there used to be more flowers and dancing. I've asked my sisters about what they've seen the times they've done this. All they tell me about is handsome men and blue skies. I guess we don't all go to the same place. After all, true love isn't the same for everyone. If there truly is someone for everyone, well, then we must face some hard facts. They could live across the world. They could have passed away. Or maybe they're just not what you expected. But the older I get, the less I worry. Maybe I'll wake up in that bathtub a third time, years from now. And if not, then at least I get to see her again. There must be something of Lilia left in Black-Eyed Susan. There has to be. Or else, she wouldn't still be my one true love.